Chapter 11:57. Deus Cluster, Messy Rock Star. As the border between the Deus Cluster and the Holy Cluster, Messy Rock Star had always been a lawless area. Therefore, it was a paradise for space pirates. As long as you were strong enough, you did not have to follow any rules here. If someone used rules to restrict you, then you could break the rules with your fists. If you could not do that, then it was best not to do anything out of line. And this was the place Qin Chuan had to pass through on his way to the Holy Cluster. On this trip to the Holy Cluster, besides Lu Zi, Qin Chuan also had Knight Serenity and Argenton by his side. The group of four disguised themselves as space tourists, so they did not attract much attention on Messy Rock Star. In a luxurious restaurant, Qin Chuan's group of four sat at a table in the corner, waiting for the waiter to serve the local delicacies of Messy Rock Star. During this time, Knight Serenity was very vigilant in observing their surroundings and did not find anything that could threaten them. If we want to go to the Holy Cluster, do we need to join a space caravan here? Qin Chuan looked at the information on the photon computer and said to everyone, "Is there any other way?" "Yes," Knight Serenity replied. "We can join a mercenary group and be hired by the Holy Cluster to go to the Holy Cluster with them." Qin Chuan nodded slightly. There were two paths in front of them now. One was to join a space caravan with a pass to the two-star clusters and enter the Holy Cluster with the caravan. The other was to become a mercenary and be hired by an employer to enter the Holy Cluster with the employer. Insu thought for a moment and said to Qin Chuan, "Actually, it's very difficult for us to join a galactic caravan. Because we don't know where we come from, no galactic caravan will be willing to accept us. But if we reveal our true identities, we will definitely attract attention and go against the original intention of our secret operation. Anyone who could establish an interstellar caravan must have a powerful background. Even if the backer was an ancient powerful clan, it must be a powerful force that was second only to the ancient powerful clan. Therefore, the interstellar caravan did not lack powerhouses. It was very difficult for them to sneak into the interstellar caravan with their fake identities. Therefore, in Argenton's opinion, their only choice was to become a mercenary, find an employer, and enter the Holy Cluster with the employer. As long as they solved the most difficult problem of entering the Holy Cluster, they would have a way to solve the identity problem. Qin Chuan looked at Knight Serenity and asked, "As a former space pirate, you should know about mercenaries. How do we do it?" Knight Serenity thought for a while and replied, "It's actually not difficult. We can either register a mercenary group or join a mercenary group. Both options have their pros and cons. If we register a mercenary group on our own, we will be relatively free to move around without any restrictions or fear of our identities being exposed. However, such a mercenary group will not have any records and will not be chosen by employers. If we join a mercenary group, although we can solve the problem of our records, our movements will definitely be restricted. There will also be a probation period, which is usually 3 months. Hearing Yi Yu's words, Qin Chuan couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. His time was incomparably precious to begin with. If he were to waste 3 months on something like the probation period, it wouldn't be worth it. Lu Zi asked Knight Serenity curiously, "Then can we register a mercenary group and take the initiative to look for an employer?" Yu thought for a moment and replied, "We can, but if we do that, others will definitely suspect our motives. Then let's be honest. We will provide protection for the employer for free, and the employer will be responsible for bringing us into the Holy Cluster. We can sign a contract." Lu Zi said to everyone, "If we reveal that one of us is an overlord in the body integration stage, I think it will be easy to get the job done." Lu Zi's words made sense. However, where could they find such an employer? "Bastard, what are you trying to do?" Just as Qin Chuan and the others were thinking about this problem, a quarrel suddenly broke out in the restaurant, attracting everyone's attention. At a table, a member of the Iron Tower clan was flirting with a member of the Succubus clan who wore a black miniskirt. Most people were already used to this, and they paid attention to this matter as if they were watching a show. "What am I trying to do? Don't you know that?" The Iron Tower man laughed out loud and looked at the Meizu woman with a lecherous gaze. "Look, I'm warning you. You better not mess around. Otherwise, when my sister comes back, she will definitely not let you off." The Meizu woman threatened the Iron Tower man. "You know that she will definitely chop off your claws." The Iron Tower man called Locke sneered and said, "Karo, stop dreaming. Bela will never come back." Karo heard him and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Locke looked at Karo playfully and replied, "I'm telling the truth. Bela should be waiting on the bed for Master Auk to come to her." Hearing Locke's words, Karo's expression changed drastically, and she exclaimed, "You're deliberately framing Bela." "That's right, that's it. Bela is too arrogant and doesn't care about us at all. Now that she has found a good home, you should have a good home too." Locke laughed sinisterly and pulled Karo into his arms. His large hands wandered around Karo's body wantonly. Karo screamed continuously, but no one stepped forward to help her. It was obviously not worth offending Locke, who was at the peak of the insightful Void Realm, for a woman from the Meizu. Just as Locke was done teasing Karo and was about to take Karo away, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Locke and said indifferently, "Let her go." Locke was about to get angry at the person who had disturbed his good mood when he heard this. However, when he sensed the vast aura from the other party, his face turned pale and he let go of Karo in fear. Beads of cold sweat rolled down his forehead, revealing his inner turmoil. "Scram, if you dare to gossip about what happened today, I'll send you to the underworld." Hearing this cold voice, Locke felt as if he had been granted amnesty and hurriedly fled the restaurant. When the onlookers saw this scene, their expressions became exceptionally strange. They looked at the black-robed man, standing next to Karo with reverence. Only an overlord at the peak of the insightful Void Realm could make Locke, who was at the peak of the insightful Void Realm, so afraid. Chapter 1158. If the crowd could guess the identity of the mysterious black-robed man, so could Carol. She gratefully looked at the mysterious black-robed man and repeatedly said, "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me. Come with me." The mysterious black-robed man turned and slowly walked toward the table in the corner. Carol followed behind him. After the mysterious black-robed man sat down, she stood to the side, trembling with fear. She looked at the other three mysterious black-robed men sitting at the table with curiosity and awe. "I think she's a good employer," said a man. A man's voice sounded, "But first, she needs to have a pass to the Saint Star Cluster." The person who spoke was none other than Qin Xuan, who was still worrying about how to sneak into the Holy Cluster. The person who saved Karo was naturally Knight Serenity, who obeyed Qin Xuan's orders. When Qin Xuan saw what happened to Karo and overheard the conversation between Karo and Karo, he realized that this was a good opportunity for them. Even if Karo didn't have a pass to the Holy Cluster, they could just treat it as doing a good deed and not lose anything. Upon hearing Qin Xuan's words, Karo immediately responded, "Sir, although I don't know what you want me to do, I'll do my best." Qin Xuan chuckled and asked Karo, "Do you have a pass to enter the Holy Cluster?" Karo nodded and replied, "I'm a member of the Holy Cluster, so of course I have a pass to enter the Holy Cluster." Qin Xuan and the others weren't surprised by Karo's answer, because the Meizu was a race that lived in the Holy Cluster. As a member of the Meizu, it was normal for Karo to have a pass to enter the Holy Cluster. However, as a member of the Meizu, Karo couldn't enter the Holy Cluster as she pleased. She was only allowed to enter the Holy Cluster for 2 months every year, and was forbidden to do so at any other time. Qin Xuan looked at Karo from head to toe and couldn't help but think of Mei. Compared to the unrestrained Mei, Karo looked much more serious. He asked Karo, "In another 10 days, you can use your pass, right?" Karo nodded and replied, "Yes, sir. In another 10 days, I can use my pass to enter the Holy Cluster." "Very good." Qin Xuan smiled and said to Karo, "Then as a reward for saving your life, you will be responsible for bringing the 4 of us into the Holy Cluster. How about that? We will form a mercenary group and follow you as mercenaries." Karo nodded at Qin Xuan's words and said, "Sir, I'm willing to help you enter the Holy Cluster." Seeing that Karo was so tactful, Qin Xuan was in a very good mood. Just as he was about to enjoy the delicious food, Caro mustered up her courage and said to Qin Chuan, "Sir, can I really hire you for once?" Qin Chuan was slightly surprised when he heard this, then smiled and said, "Let me guess. You want to hire us to find your sister Bela?" Caro nodded vigorously and said to Qin Chuan, "Sir, I have a lot of star stones, and so does my sister. As long as you are willing to help us, I am willing to give you everything I have." Qin Chuan smiled and looked at Caro with a playful gaze. He asked, "What makes you think that we will really be hired by you? Or are you planning to use the past to threaten me?" Caro's expression changed when she heard Qin Chuan's words. She hurriedly said to Qin Chuan, "Sir, I definitely don't mean that. I really want to ask for your help. Tell me about it." Qin Chuan crossed his arms and said to Caro, "Tell us about your sister's situation. If it is not complicated, I don't mind helping you once." Caro was pleasantly surprised when she heard this. She bowed to Qin Chuan and said, "Thank you, sir." After thanking Qin Chuan, Caro said to Qin Chuan, "Sir, you should know about the Meizu. In the Meizu, both men and women are the most beautiful. My sister Bela is even more beautiful. If it were not for Bela's excellent cultivation talent, and the fact that she is already an almighty cultivator at the peak of the Dongshu realm, she might have been imprisoned by some big shot and become his exclusive property. However, although Bela is already an almighty cultivator at the peak of the Dongshu realm, there are still people in this world that she can't afford to offend. Those are the overlords at the body integration stage. Ak is such a person. Ak took a fancy to Bela and wanted to take her as his exclusive property. Bela refused, so Bela and I found an opportunity to escape from the Holy Cluster. We came to Rubble Star and established a mercenary group here. Bela relied on her powerful strength and outstanding charm to quickly expand the mercenary group and became a famous mercenary group leader on Rubble Star. A year ago, Locke, who was Bela's assistant, received a mission with a very generous reward. However, this mission required him to go to the Holy Cluster. Bela chose to take the risk for the generous reward. She left for a year and hasn't returned since. As a mercenary, it's normal to be out on missions all year round. I didn't suspect anything at first. It wasn't until Locke suddenly had designs on me and wanted to play with me that I realized something was wrong. So, I escaped from the mercenary group headquarters and came here. However, I didn't expect Locke to chase after me and say those words. This made me realize that Bela must have been deceived by Locke. That mission was fake, and the real mastermind must be Locke. I really can't imagine what kind of torture Bela would suffer if she fell into Locke's hands. So, I beg all of you to help me save Bela from Locke. Qin Chuan didn't feel any sympathy for Caro's words. He asked Caro indifferently, "What price do you think you can pay for us to become enemies with a universe overlord?" Caro heard Qin Chuan's words and gritted her teeth. She said to Qin Chuan, "Sir, I'm willing to be your concubine. I'm still a virgin." After hearing Caro's words, Qin Chuan subconsciously looked at Caro from head to toe. He had to admit that Meizu's appearance was impeccable. However, when a small foot stepped on the back of Qin Chuan's foot, Qin Chuan realized that he had done something wrong. "I'm not interested in taking you as my concubine. I need something more practical in return." Qin Chuan gently held Lu Zi's hand on the table and said to Caro, "You still have 10 days. You can seriously think about what you can offer me. If you can't do it, then I'm sorry, I won't help you." Chapter 1159. Qin Chuan had never been a kind-hearted person who was easily moved. Their trip to the Holy Cluster this time wasn't for sightseeing, nor was it to do good deeds. If it wasn't necessary, Qin Chuan didn't want to have a conflict with anyone, especially with a combination stage overlord. No one knew what kind of background she had and who was behind her. Qin Chuan was sure that if his identity was exposed in the Holy Cluster, the chances of him leaving the Holy Cluster alive would be extremely slim. Therefore, if Caro couldn't offer him something that he was interested in, he would definitely not cause any more trouble. However, there were still some things that needed to be done, such as cleaning up some irrelevant people. That night, Qin Chuan asked Argentine and Knight Serenity to follow Caro to clean up the elite mercenary group established by Bela and Caro. Not a single person was spared. The reason he did this was to make it easier for him to control Carol and eliminate some discordant voices in the mercenary group. Although Locke definitely wouldn't dare to resist, no one could guarantee that Locke wouldn't tell Oak, who was far away in the St. Star cluster, about what happened today. Another reason was to warn Carol that they weren't so easy to deal with and would still kill. Obviously, after personally participating in the massacre, Carol's attitude towards Qin Xuan and the others became more respectful. At the same time, she began to feel anxious. It wasn't easy for her to meet such a strong group of people like Qin Xuan. If she didn't take this opportunity to rescue Bela, she didn't know where she would find such a good opportunity again. In the inn, Qin Xuan and LVZ sat at a table and drank tea. The tea leaves were taken with them when they left the banished land. Even now, they still hadn't finished drinking it. It wasn't because there were a lot of tea leaves, but because the two of them would only drink this tea when they were together again. That was why they drank this tea very slowly. These tea leaves were personally planted by Teacher Ningya. Every time I drink it, I can almost smell the fragrance on Teacher Ningya's body. LVZ sipped her tea as she recalled the past, feeling rather emotional. Qin Xuan raised his eyebrows and smiled. Is that so? Why don't I smell any fragrance? Maybe it's because you're too close to Teacher Ningya. Lu Zi smiled. After all, you two are teacher and disciple. When Ningya was mentioned, Qin Xuan also missed her greatly. Even now, he could still remember the first time he had met Ningya. Ningya had given him a Black Moon Combat Academy badge and opened the path for him to become a talisman array master. When he was still weak, Ningya had always carefully protected him. Ningya was the only teacher that Qin Xuan had ever acknowledged, and she would also be Qin Xuan's teacher for the rest of his life. Lu Zi put down her teacup and asked Qin Xuan, "How are you going to deal with Karo?" When Qin Xuan heard this, he smiled faintly and replied, "I have already made it very clear today. If she can't take out a bargaining chip that can move my heart, then I will definitely not help her. This is a transaction that will not be mixed with anything else. If she wants to play some tricks, then don't blame me for being ruthless and destroying a flower." Hearing Qin Xuan's reply, Lu Zi sighed. Actually, she and Bela are both pitiful people. In this universe where the strong prey on the weak, if a woman is too beautiful and doesn't have the strength to protect herself, then it will definitely be very difficult. Lu Zi could actually understand Bela and Karo's difficulties. This was because she had experienced the same thing before. Back at the Duke's mansion in Rose City, she had been targeted. If not for Qin Xuan's timely arrival, her fate would have been very miserable. Therefore, Lu Zi was very grateful that Qin Xuan was always by her side. Qin Xuan heard Lu Zi's words and asked, "You want to help them?" Lu Zi shook her head and said, "Sympathy is one thing, but some things can't be decided on the spur of the moment. We're going to the Holy Cluster this time, and we may encounter a lot of dangers here. If it's not necessary, I don't want to provoke strangers who don't need to be provoked." Buzz. The door of the room was open from the outside, and Knight Serenity walked in with a key card in his hand. He said to Qin Xuan, "It's done." Locke didn't have time to reveal the matter. "Argentin will be on duty tonight." Qin Xuan nodded and asked Knight Serenity, "Did Karo do anything unusual?" Yu shook his head and replied, "She invited us to visit her treasury, which is her storage ring. She wanted us to help her come up with some ideas and see if there's anything that can tempt you. Unfortunately, the items in her possession are all worthless. The most valuable one is a medium-quality saint artifact. I don't think you'll be interested in it. However, she told me that the real good things are with Bela, but I don't think Bela has anything good." Qin Xuan smiled and said to Knight Serenity, "You're right. It seems that Karo won't be able to take out anything that can move me." Just as Qin Xuan finished speaking, a call came from outside the room. It was Argentin who was on duty outside. "Qin Xuan, Karo is here. She wants to see you." Qin Xuan raised his eyebrows slightly and said to Argentin, "Let her in. You come in too." When the door opened, Argentin and Karo walked in together. Karo looked at Qin Xuan with some uneasiness and said, "I've already checked all my savings. There's nothing that can move you." Looking at Karo's dejected expression, Qin Chuan smiled faintly and said, "So what do you mean by looking for me now? Are you trying to move me in some other way? I said that I only want benefits." Caro hesitated and said to Qin Chuan, "I have some secrets that no one knows. I don't know if I can use them to make a deal." Qin Chuan raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "You have to tell me. After I hear it, I can judge whether it can be used to make a deal or not. But you have to think carefully. Once you say it, the secret won't be a secret anymore." Caro gritted her teeth and said to Qin Chuan, "I'm willing to try." Qin Chuan pointed to a chair and said to Caro, "Sit down and talk slowly." Caro walked to the chair and sat down. After organizing her words, she said to Qin Chuan, "Bela and I have been wandering around for the past few years and have heard many rumors. After some investigation, we found that some of the rumors were not rumors, but true." Qin Chuan looked at Caro curiously and said, "For example?" Caro pursed her lips and said to Qin Chuan, "On an uninhabited, abandoned planet in the Holy Cluster, there's a large amount of psionic or storage." Chapter 1160. When he heard Caro reveal this secret, Qin Chuan was actually a little disappointed. Although psionic energy ores were very valuable minerals, a psionic energy mine in the Holy Cluster was obviously not attractive to Qin Chuan. He could not stay in the Holy Cluster to mine psionic energy ores. Even if he managed to mine them, he had no way to transport them out. As for selling psionic energy ores in the Holy Cluster, it was no different from committing suicide. Moreover, Qin Chuan felt that if Caro knew about the psionic energy mine, others might know about it as well. Perhaps a large number of people were mining psionic energy ores on that planet at this time. Seeing the obvious disappointment on Qin Chuan's face, Caro knew that Qin Chuan was not interested in this news. So she immediately said, "In addition to psionic energy ores, I also know that someone has a high-grade sacred artifact, and it's a defensive high-grade sacred artifact. This information is very secretive. I can guarantee that no more than 5 people in the world know about it." A high-grade sacred artifact was definitely a treasure, but Caro did not see any interest on Qin Chuan's face. This made Caro panic. Qin Chuan sighed and said to Caro, "If this is the only secret you're talking about, then you can leave." Wait a minute. Right at this moment, LVZ suddenly spoke, and this allowed Caro, who was already in despair, to see a trace of hope. Lu Zi gave Qin Chuan a look to calm down, then said to Caro, "Actually, you don't have to rack your brains to think about these so-called unknown secrets. We came to the Holy Cluster this time because we are most interested in the master of the Holy Cluster. Do you have any information about the insect, the Holy Clan?" Hearing Lu Zi's words, Caro was slightly stunned. Qin Chuan, on the other hand, was interested. Why didn't he think of asking Caro about Zerg? Hearing Lu Zi asking about Zerg, Caro frowned after thinking for a while and said, "Although the Holy Clan is the ruler of the Holy Cluster, they have always been very mysterious. Except for some holy envoys, they rarely act outside. I don't know much about the Holy Clan." Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were a little disappointed when they heard Caro's answer. Lu Zi did not expect that Caro still could not tell them any exciting secrets after she gave her a reminder and care. There was nothing she could do. "However, I do know something that a lot of people know," Caro said hesitantly. "This matter is related to the Holy Clan, but you don't have to ask me." Qin Chuan smiled and said to Caro, "Just say it. As long as the information is useful to us, it's yours." Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, Caro's face immediately showed a look of surprise, and she quickly said, "A few years ago, the Holy Clan had a large-scale operation. At that time, many people were curious about what the Holy Clan was going to do. Then, not long after, news of the destruction of Tron, Nebula's Terran capital, came. Because this time happened to be close to the time of the Holy Clan's operation, many people guessed that it was the Holy Clan who destroyed Tron Nebula." Qin Chuan's expression immediately became serious when he heard Caro's words. He knew very well that this guess was right. It was Zerg who destroyed Tron Nebula. "What else do you know?" Qin Chuan looked deeply at Caro. "Don't wait for me to ask. Tell me everything." Seeing that Qin Chuan was so concerned about this matter, Caro immediately continued, At that time, when the Holy Clan troops returned to the Holy Cluster, they had a short rest in Chaos Rockstar. At that time, some Holy Clan people were eating and chatting outside, and they mentioned some things about the human race. Some people suspected that the large-scale operation of the Holy Clan this time was related to the disappearance of the ancient humans, but these were just rumors, and no one took them seriously. Hearing Caro's words, Qin took a deep breath and asked Caro, "Do you remember how the Holy Clan people specifically mentioned the human race at that time?" Caro lowered her head and frowned for a long time, then replied, "Sorry, I only heard about it at that time. I wasn't at the scene, so I don't know what they said specifically, but I know the person who was at the scene. He must remember what happened at that time." Qin pursed his lips and said to Caro, "Bring that person to see me. Knight Serenity, you go with her." Knight Serenity saw that Qin attached great importance to this matter, so naturally, she didn't dare to neglect it. Caro also hoped that this matter could move Qin and persuade him to rescue Bela. Of course, she was very enthusiastic and couldn't wait to bring that person back to see Qin. After Knight Serenity and Caro left, Qin's tense expression finally relaxed and became extremely gloomy and ugly. Luzi's expression was also very ugly, because she knew very well that Zerg had always known about the existence of the human race and the land of exile. Since Zerg mentioned the human race, something very important must have happened. Qin, do you think that Zerg went to Tron Nebula that time? In addition to destroying Tron Capital, he also went to the land of exile? Speaking of the land of exile, Luzi couldn't help but feel a little worried. Qin shook his head and said, "It's meaningless for us to make wild guesses now. Moreover, the laws of heaven and earth in the land of exile are very strange. No matter how powerful a person is, their realm will be suppressed to the perfect, nascent soul stage when they go there. Zerg won't have any advantage if he goes there. I believe that the land of exile should still be safe for now." Hearing Qin's comforting words, Luzi was still very nervous. After all, it wasn't the first time that Zerg attacked the land of exile. They had been away from the land of exile for more than 10 years. No one knew what happened in the land of exile during this period of time. Could the human race and shifter race resist Zerg's invasion again? She couldn't wait to know what Zerg said at that time. Soon, Knight Serenity and Caro came back with a man. This man was a member of the Leap mercenary group. He was a die-hard fan of Caro and Bela. His name was Storm, and he was from the Wind Clan. On the way here, Caro had already told Storm about this matter. Storm was also mentally prepared. Facing Qin and Luzi's gaze, he replied, "At that time, I was drinking in the same bar as those two Zerg people. Because I was sitting close to them, and because I'm very sensitive to sounds, I heard some intermittent conversations." After hearing Storm's nonsense, Qin couldn't help but ask, "Get to the point." Storm immediately replied, "Human race, accidental escape. The other one, that's all I heard." Chapter 1161. Human, accidentally escaped, another one. Qin could not help but fall into deep thought when he heard Storm's words. Although these few simple words contained very little information, it was enough for Qin to fill in a lot of things in his mind. At this time, Knight Serenity and the others had been sent away by Luzi. Only Qin and Luzi were left in the room. They were both quietly thinking about the problem. In the long silence, neither of them made a sound. Human accidentally escaped, another one. Qin murmured in a low voice, frowning. "It seems that Zerg already knows that someone has left the banished land and has even locked onto me. As for the other one, does it mean that there are other people who have left the banished land?" Hearing Qin's words, Luzi pursed her lips and said, "After we left, the people who had the chance to leave the banished land were the ancients. The ancients that Luzi mentioned were Qin Fenghua, Qian Wujin, Shimen Weiyong, and Yiting. When they left, they had promised that as long as the four of them could cultivate a qualified successor, they could leave the banished land on Zerg's spaceship and head to the outside world. If there was anyone who had the chance to leave the banished land after them, it would definitely be one of the four." Qin nodded. I even guessed that when they were piloting Zerg's spaceship, they might have been inadvertently detected by Zerg. That's why Zerg went to Tron Nebula on a large scale. Luzi's expression changed slightly. She said to Qin Chuan, "Could it be that one of them was captured by Zerg? It's not impossible." Qin Chuan's tone was a little low as he said, "The reason why the Zergs went to the Tron Nebula was most likely because they heard my name from them. Then, they locked onto me and wanted to kill me. But coincidentally, I was taken away from the Tushan clan by Dwelun under your name. That's how I escaped this disaster." Qin Chuan was almost certain that even if what he guessed was not the truth, it was not far from the truth. He suddenly felt a little lucky. If Dwelun had not taken him away, he might not even have the chance to wake up before he died at Zerg's hands. Hearing Qin Chuan's guess, Lu Zi's expression changed again. They betrayed the human race. Qin Chuan pursed his lips and said, "When they first entered the universe, even if they were lucky, they would only become early-stage apotheosis realm cultivators. And the person they had to face was the powerful Zerg. Even if they were unwilling to betray us, Zerg must have 10,000 ways to pry open their mouths. Doesn't that mean that Zerg already knows that you are a human, and even that I am a human? If that's the case, why haven't they done anything to us?" Lu Zi was very puzzled. Since Zerg destroyed Qin Chuan and the entire capital of Tron, he must want to get rid of Qin Chuan as soon as possible. In that case, there was no reason why they had not taken any new action until now. Qin Chuan took a deep look at Lu Zi and said, "Have you forgotten about the Void Empire? There is a collusion between Zerg and the Void Empire." Lu Zi did not know about the Lotus of the Void, but Qin Chuan had already guessed that the reason why Zerg had not taken action against him must be that Zerg was confident in the Lotus of the Void and thought that he could not escape the erosion of the Lotus of the Void. Lu Zi saw the gloomy look on Qin Chuan's face and asked, "Are you still hiding something from me?" Since things had developed to this point, Qin Chuan no longer hid it. He took off his shirt and presented the Lotus of the Void on his chest to Lu Zi. He said to Lu Zi, "When I was investigating the Void Empire, I once met a late-stage combination realm powerhouse from the Void Empire. At that time, I had no power to fight back and was planted with the power of the Void. If I can't resolve this power of the Void within 3 years, I will be eroded and turn into a Void creature. Now, I only have 1 year left." Hearing Qin Chuan's words and seeing the Lotus of the Void on Qin Chuan's chest, Lu Zi subconsciously raised her hand to cover her mouth. Tears flowed out of her eyes in an instant. She could not help but ask Qin Chuan, "Why didn't you tell me such an important thing until now?" Qin Chuan smiled bitterly and said, "The more people know about this, the more people will worry about me. I don't want you to worry too much because it is meaningless." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Lu Zi held back her tears and said in an incomparably firm tone, "I will never let you be eroded by the power of the Void." Qin Chuan smiled and said, "I will also do my best to not be eroded by the power of the Void." After crying, Lu Zi also calmed down and asked Qin Chuan, "What do you plan to do next?" Qin Chuan thought for a moment and said to Lu Zi, "Our plan will not change. We will still sneak into the Holy Cluster and investigate this matter. We will find out who left the exiled land and fell into Zerg's hands. I am very glad that I made the decision to let Baiyu and Mysterious Snake protect the exiled land. Perhaps they went there at the right time. The exiled land, the Air Center. Ever since Qin Chuan defeated Zerg's Red Vanguard and took back the Air Center, the existence of the Air Center was no longer a secret. It was no longer a place to cultivate heirs. Instead, it was used as the first line of defense for both humans and demons to resist the invasion. Today, this line of defense was finally unable to hold on against the Zerg's ferocious attacks again and again. As the highest commander on the front line, Chun Chongqing stood on a tall building and looked at the battlefield in front of him with a serious expression. There were only 3 of the 32 fortifications that had not been breached yet. Once these 3 fortifications were breached, they would be forced to fight Zerg head-on. Long Xiao, who was wearing a black combat suit, walked over slowly and said to Chun Chongqing, Chongqing, I have already set up 2 level 4 defense rune arrays in front of the last fortification. Perhaps it can hold on for a while longer. Chongqing sighed and said, it's meaningless. It can't hold on for long. Long Xiao looked at Chongqing with a complicated expression and said, let's retreat. We can't have too many people die here. Chongqing gritted his teeth and said, I am the highest commander on the front line. I cannot retreat. Long Xiao frowned and said, why are you doing this? No one will blame you for this. Boss took this back with great difficulty. I can't lose it in my hands. Chongqing gritted his teeth and said, I have made up my mind. When the time comes, I will lead the Black Heaven sect disciples to cover everyone's retreat. We will fight to the death. Chapter 1162. Hearing Chongqing's words, Long Xiao could not help but think of the person who had always held up the sky for them. The expression on her face became more complicated. She sighed and said, if Qin Xuan was still here, do you think we can hold on? Of course we can. We definitely can. Boss has never let us down when it comes to fighting against the Zergs, and he has never let us down in any other aspect. Don't forget, Boss is the miracle child, the strongest person among us humans and shifters. Chongqing replied without hesitation. He had absolute confidence in Qin Xuan. If Qin Xuan was still here, he could guarantee that these damn Zerg would not even be able to break through their first line of defense. It's a pity that he left. It's been almost 15 years, and he hasn't come back. There's also no news about him. If it wasn't for the fact that Teacher Ningyu still had Qin Xuan's life token, I would have thought that he had already died outside. But if he's still alive, it's been 15 years. Did he not think of coming back? Long Xiao sighed again. She also felt that Qin Xuan would not let Zerg break through the center of the Kunlun field so easily. However, Qin Xuan was no longer here. There was no point in thinking about these things. Perhaps one day, when Qin Xuan came back from the outside, what awaited him would be hell on earth. Just as Chongqing and Long Xiao were talking, 2 more lines of defense were broken through. Now, they only had 1 line of defense left. Zerg's attack was too fierce. Perhaps in less than 10 minutes, they would have to face Zerg's army directly. Crimson Army. It's the Crimson Army again. Why can't they kill all of them? Chongqing looked at Zerg's army in the distance and gritted his teeth. He had already drawn his sword and was ready to attack. Long Xiao looked at Chongqing and asked, are you really not leaving? If you don't think for yourself, don't you think for Senior Lan and the child in her stomach? Hearing Long Xiao mention Lan Shuxin, Chongqing's face showed a hint of struggle. He gritted his teeth and said to Long Xiao, take care of her for me. Long Xiao wanted to persuade Chongqing again, but at that moment, Zerg suddenly gave up on attacking the last line of defense. He turned around and hurriedly retreated. Seeing this, Chongqing and Long Xiao were extremely shocked. They didn't understand what was going on. Why would Zerg give up on the air center, which was so close to being his? And in the universe they couldn't see, a spaceship as tall as a tree was chasing after Zerg's fleet. On the Hope's deck, Bai Yu's gaze was sharp and cold as she stared at the Zerg fleet. She told Black Snake, who was standing beside her, Senior, kill these Zerg, don't leave a single one alive. The center of the airs, Chongqing and Long Xiao stood on top of a tall building, gazing into the distance. It had been half a day since Zerg retreated, and Zerg had yet to return. If it wasn't for the chaotic battlefield, they would have thought that Zerg's invasion was just a dream. Did they really retreat? Even though he saw it with his own eyes, Chongqing still couldn't believe it. He couldn't figure out why Zerg would suddenly retreat. Long Xiao couldn't figure it out, but she knew that this was a good thing. She turned to Chongqing and said, I've already contacted Star Dragon City. The Federation and the Demon Realm weren't attacked by the insectoids. They really did retreat. Chongqing turned his head to look at Long Xiao. His gaze was strange. Could it be that your 2 rune matrices forced them to retreat? Long Xiao smiled coldly and said, You're thinking too much. I'm still very clear about my own capabilities. Maybe this is just a temporary strategic retreat, but no matter what, it's a good thing for us. Send people to repair the defense immediately. I will continue to inscribe rune matrices and try to repair as many as possible before Zerg's next attack. Chen Changxing nodded. The most important thing right now was to prepare for Zerg's next attack. What Chen Changxing and Long Xiao didn't know was that Zerg's next attack wouldn't come for a very long time. This was because Zerg's fleet had been annihilated by Dusk Snake. These Zerg soldiers were only at the early stage of the Dongxi realm. There was no way they could withstand Dusk Snake's destructive attack. Bai Yu listened to Qin Chuan's suggestion and didn't enter the center of the airs. Instead, she and Dusk Snake stood guard in the dark universe. They would replace the center of the airs and become the first line of defense for the exiled land. If Zerg wanted to attack the center of the airs again, he would have to defeat them first. Messy Rockstar. Qin Chuan's attempt to contact Bai Yu or Dusk Snake ended in failure. This meant that Bai Yu and Dusk Snake had entered the dark universe and might have found the exiled land. This was neither good nor bad news. On the other hand, Night Serenity had erased Storm's memories of last night according to Lu Zi's orders. Caro had signed a contract that forbade her from telling anyone what happened last night for the rest of her life. Caro had signed the contract willingly because Qin Chuan had promised her that he would deal with Auk and rescue Bela. Now, all they had to do was wait for the interstellar portal to the Holy Cluster to open and they could depart. During this time, Caro had helped Qin Chuan and the others complete the mercenary registration. Qin Chuan and the others were now members of the Leap mercenary group. As long as Caro led them, they could freely enter the Holy Cluster. After 10 days of torment, Caro could hardly wait to lead Qin Chuan and the others into the Holy Cluster. Qin Chuan stood by the window of the spaceship and looked at the giant interstellar portal in front of them. As long as they entered the portal, they would enter the Holy Cluster and enter Zerg's territory. Are you nervous? Lu Zi looked at Qin Chuan. Maybe Zerg has been watching us closely all this time, waiting for us to walk into their trap. Qin Chuan smiled. If they really have the ability to do so, then it's not wrong for us to die in their hands. But before we die, I'm confident that I can kill enough Zerg to be my scapegoat. Lu Zi reached out and held Qin Chuan's hand. After we figure out what happened here, we'll return to the banished land. Qin Chuan nodded and held Lu Zi's hand tightly. I'll listen to you. While Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were talking, Zerg's troop stationed at the interstellar portal had already checked Caro's pass and let them through. When a spaceship slowly entered the interstellar portal, Qin Chuan's breathing could not help but quicken. Zerg, I'm here. Chapter 1163. There wasn't much difference between the Holy Cluster and the Celestial Cluster. After the spaceship passed through the interstellar portal, Qin Chuan saw an ordinary universe. Other than the few Zerg soldiers who were obviously wearing Zerg armor, everything was fine. After a new round of inspection, they were once again allowed to move freely in the Holy Cluster. Of course, they couldn't go to Zerg's territory. They could only go to the public areas that belonged to all the races. After the spaceship left the interstellar portal, Caro couldn't wait to find Qin Chuan. Sir, we're safe now. What do you plan to do next? Qin Chuan looked at the anxious expression on Caro's face. He knew that Caro must want to find Auk immediately and save Bela. After thinking for a while, Qin Chuan said to the anxious Caro, "Tell me about Auk." Caro was relieved when she heard this. She quickly said, Auk is from the Iron Tower race. He's the leader of the Iron Tower race, an overlord in the middle stage of the combination stage. Most of the Iron Tower race are gathered on the Iron Tower planet. They've always been the vassals of the Holy Clan and serve the Holy Clan. Auk is very strong, especially in terms of defense. He's definitely one of the best in the same stage. Very few people can break through his defense. Other than Auk, the Iron Tower race has another overlord in the combination stage called Rant. He's in the early stage of the combination stage and has always been Auk's right-hand man. Caro looked at Qin Chuan nervously. After all, she had never told Qin Chuan that there was another overlord in the combination stage by Auk's side. However, she was relieved when she saw that Qin Chuan's expression didn't change. Obviously, Qin Chuan didn't care how many overlords in the combination stage the Iron Tower race had. Qin Chuan asked Caro, "What do you plan to do?" Kill Auk and Rant directly? Karo couldn't help but have some strange thoughts when she heard Qin words. It was as if Qin thought that killing 2 overlords in the combination stage was as easy as killing 2 chicks. If she knew that more than 20 overlords in the combination stage had died directly or indirectly at the hands of Qin, she probably wouldn't have such strange thoughts. Karo thought for a moment and said to Qin, killing Auk and Rant is definitely the simplest and most effective way. However, the Iron Tower planet security is very tight. It'll be difficult for us to break in with so many people. Qin thought for a moment and asked Karo, if the Iron Tower planet is attacked, will the insect, holy race come to help? Karo looked at Qin with a strange expression and said, Sir, do you hate Saint Zerg? Qin chuckled and said, you should answer my question first. Karo thought for a moment and said, if the Iron Tower planet is attacked, Auk will definitely ask Saint Zerg for help. However, Zerg's reinforcements won't be able to arrive in time. It'll take at least 2 to 3 days, unless Zerg happens to have a combination stage overlord on the Iron Tower planet. Qin thought for a moment and asked Lu Zi, what do you think? Lu Zi replied, I suggest we keep a low profile. After all, killing 2 combination stage overlords is not a small matter. Not everyone could do it. If it's not a last resort, it's best if we can save Bela without bloodshed. Lu Zi paused for a moment and said, however, Auk will definitely keep Bela by his side. If we want to save Bela, we can't avoid Auk. Qin thought for a moment and asked Karo, in the Holy Cluster, who is the enemy of the Iron Tower race? The archenemy. Karo heard Qin's words and knew that Qin wanted to frame them. She said to Qin, the Iron Tower race has many enemies, but the archenemy is definitely the Wind race. Hearing Karo's answer, Qin asked, is the Wind race also one of Zerg's vassals? If the Wind race exterminated the Iron Tower race, what are the consequences? Zerg doesn't restrict his vassals from fighting each other. Instead, he encourages this behavior. The weak are prey to the strong. Only the strong can gain Zerg's favor. If the Wind race exterminated the Iron Tower race, Zerg won't interfere. Moreover, the benefits that originally belonged to the Iron Tower race will go to the Wind race. Karo paused for a moment and then asked Qin hesitantly, Mister, are you trying to borrow the Wind race's power? I'm afraid it will be difficult to gain their trust. Qin smiled and said to Karo, I don't plan to borrow their power. I just want to borrow their name. You should have the contact of the Wind race, right? Find someone with a higher status and send them an anonymous message. If they're willing to take the blame, I will give them a big gift. Iron Tower planet was located in the northwest of the Holy Cluster. It was a relatively remote location. The more than 200 solar systems in this area were all managed by the Iron Tower race. The Iron Tower race could keep 30% of the benefits they obtained from these 200 solar systems. The remaining 70% would be handed over to Zerg. When Qin and the others arrived at the outskirts of Iron Tower planet, it was already 10 days later. Qin stood in front of the porthole and looked at the Iron Tower planet that was almost transformed into a metal planet. It was as if he was looking at Tu Huayuan. However, compared to Tu Huayuan, Iron Tower planet's defense was obviously stronger. Karo stood beside Qin and asked nervously, are we really going to attack by force? Qin nodded and said, you just need to tell me if you want the Iron Tower race to be exterminated or if you just want to save Bela. Karo trembled with excitement when she heard Qin's words. She said to Qin, not everyone in the Iron Tower race is bad. My lord, you just need to kill the overlord of the Iron Tower race. Qin grinned and said, you are kind to think that way. However, the Iron Tower race is destined to be exterminated. After Auk and Rant die, the Wind race will take over this territory. Do you think they will let the Iron Tower race go? Karo's expression became complicated when she heard Qin's words. She knew very well that with the Wind race's hatred for the Iron Tower race, there was no way they would let anyone from the Iron Tower race go. All right, that's the end of the chat. Qin turned to Argentine and Knight Serenity and said, You two go and lure Auk and Rand out. We will deal with them in this universe and then find Bela. We will end this quickly. Chapter 1164. Iron Tower Planet, the tallest tower. In a spacious black iron palace, a 10-meter-tall figure sat on a huge black iron throne. He looked at the center of the hall with a playful gaze. There was a black iron cage there, and an enchanting figure was imprisoned inside. Because her head was dripping, no one could see the expression on her face. Bela, are you still unwilling to submit? The tall figure sitting on the black iron throne looked at Bela in the cage and spoke in an extremely low voice. Time slowly passed, but Bela had no intention of speaking at all. This made Auk angry. As the strongest person in the Iron Tower tribe and a well-known figure in the Holy Cluster, he felt that he had given enough face to Bela. He did not expect Bela to be so untactful. Oof. I've already sent people to Rocky Star to find your sister. I like to see how long you can be so stubborn. Hearing Auk's words, Bela finally reacted. She raised her head and revealed a charming face. Her eyes, which should have been bright and moving, were now filled with hatred. She hated Auk so much that she wanted to tear him apart. Kill me. Bela did not say any threatening words to Auk because she knew very well that she could not threaten Auk at all. The only thing she could do now was beg for death. As long as she died, she would no longer have to be humiliated by Auk, and she would not have to see her sister suffer such a miserable fate. Everything would end once and for all. Kill you? I didn't spend so much effort to bring you back just to kill you. Auk chuckled. When your sister comes to Iron Tower Planet, I'll let you make a choice. Auk looked at Bela lustfully and said, either you serve me, or your sister serves me. One of you has to submit for the other. Ha ha ha. Hearing Auk's words, Bela's face was filled with despair. If she really had to face such a situation, she would really be finished. Boom! A terrifying energy wave pierced through the top of the tower and landed in the hall in front of the iron cage. Who is it? Auk looked sharply at the graceful figure slowly walking out of the dust. Judging from her aura, she was also an overlord of the form synthesis stage, but they had never seen her before. Knight Serenity ignored Auk. She looked at Bela in the cage and asked, Are you Bela? Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Bela asked, Do you know me? Knight Serenity nodded and said, I also know your sister Caro. She asked me to save you. Hearing Yiyu's words, Bela's eyes, which were already filled with despair, suddenly lit up. She said with some excitement, Did my sister really ask you to come and save me? Where is she? Knight Serenity was just about to answer Bela when Auk's majestic body suddenly appeared behind her. He said in a deep voice, You're looking down on me too much. Boom. Auk punched out, but Knight Serenity turned around and blocked his punch. In the face of Auk's punch, which could penetrate the Earth's core, Knight Serenity only took 2 steps back. Auk looked at Knight Serenity in surprise. Then he sneered and said, Caro asked you to come? Does she think a mere overlord of the form synthesis stage like you can do anything to me? Ridiculous. If one isn't enough, how about 2? Argentin's figure slowly appeared behind Auk. Now he was at the middle stage of the form synthesis stage, which was the same as Auk's. Seeing Argentin's appearance, Auk's expression became gloomy. He didn't expect Caro to be able to ask 2 overlords of the form synthesis stage to deal with him. Moreover, they looked very unfamiliar. He had never seen them before. So what if there are 2 of them? There are 2 of us. At this moment, another tall figure appeared in the palace. It was Auk's right-hand man, Rune, who was at the early stage of the form synthesis stage. Let's go. Su and Yiyu saw that the situation was not good and immediately wanted to leave. In a flash, they left the hall and flew up into the sky. Auk and Rune chased after them without thinking. If they couldn't kill Argentin and Knight Serenity, they wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. With the flying speed of overlords of the form synthesis stage, Argentin and Knight Serenity soon left the Iron Tower planet and arrived in the universe. Auk and Rune followed closely behind. When Argentin and Knight Serenity stopped beside Qinchuan and Lu Zi, Auk and Rune also stopped. Before leaving the Iron Tower planet, Auk and Rant had already noticed Qin Chuan and Lu Zi standing in the universe. However, Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were at the peak of the insightful void stage, while the other was at the peak of the insightful void stage. Therefore, it didn't take them seriously. When they saw Argentine and Knight Serenity stop beside Qin Chuan, they realized that things weren't as simple as they thought. Qin Chuan glanced at Auk and Rant, then asked Lu Zi, "Are you sure you can do it?" Lu Zi nodded and said, "If you can fight above your level, there's no reason why I can't do it." Although Lu Zi's words didn't sound right, Qin Chuan still decided to give Lu Zi a chance. After all, with him around, there wouldn't be any big problems. Qin Chuan and Lu Zi didn't deliberately talk to each other or lower their voices. Auk and Rant could hear them clearly. At this moment, they realized that these people weren't just here to save Bela, but also to use them as practice. At this thought, Auk and Lan Ying's faces darkened. "Who are you?" Without knowing the other party's identity and background, Auk decided to use peaceful means before resorting to force. He wanted to figure out the other party's situation before deciding whether to make a move. However, Qin Chuan had no intention of introducing himself to Auk. He said to Lu Zi, "Let's do it, lest something unexpected happens." Lu Zi nodded when she heard this. She immediately activated her purple star divine eyes and shot a hazy purple light at Auk and Rant. When Auk and Rant saw this scene, it was too late to dodge. "So fast!" Auk exclaimed. When he wanted to block it, he realized that the hazy purple light had directly penetrated his body. It didn't seem to cause any harm to him. Just as Auk was feeling a little strange, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly appeared in front of him. He raised his hand and punched out with astonishing strength. Bang! Auk returned Qin Chuan's punch almost without hesitation. However, what he didn't expect was that Qin Chuan's strength was much greater than he had imagined. It was almost on par with Rant. Rumble. The battle between Auk and Qin Chuan became more and more intense. The entire starry sky became their battlefield. At this moment, Auk didn't notice that except for him and Qin Chuan, everyone else's figures had mysteriously disappeared. Chapter 1165. In the universe, Qin Chuan and the others stood there, calmly watching Auk and Rant, who were frantically attacking each other. They felt like they were watching a show. This Rant is indeed a little weaker than that Auk. He's barely holding on. Qin Chuan commented on the battle between Auk and Rant while curiously asking Lu Zi, "In the illusion, who is their opponent?" "It's you." Lu Zi answered with a smile. When she cast the illusion, she didn't think too much and subconsciously brought Qin Chuan into it. Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qin Chuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry and asked, "Why me?" "Because I could only think of you at the moment," Lu Zi answered matter-of-factly. "Could it be that you were hoping for Knight Serenity or Argentine?" Qin Chuan shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's the same no matter who it is. It doesn't matter." Just as Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were talking, Caro, who was anxious to rescue Bela, brought Bela, who had already escaped from the cage, back to everyone's side. She looked at Qin Chuan gratefully and said, "Thank you, sir, for your help." Qin Chuan chuckled and looked at Bela from head to toe. After that, he said, "You're quite pretty." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Bela subconsciously lowered her head, as if she didn't want Qin Chuan to see her face. She had already experienced despair once, and she didn't want to enter the tiger's mouth after escaping from the wolf's mouth. Caro glanced at Auk and Rant, who were fighting fiercely, and asked with some doubt, "What's wrong with them?" Lu Zi smiled and said, "They're under the illusion and think of each other as opponents. They're trying their best to kill each other." Hearing Lu Zi's answer, Caro couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. She didn't expect Auk and Rant to be under the illusion. To be able to make two overlords under the illusion at the same time, this method was definitely not ordinary. "All right, it's about time. Let's end it," Qin Chuan said to Argentine and Knight Serenity. "Go kill them." Hearing Qin Chuan's order, Knight Serenity and Argentine immediately sprang into action. Each of them rushed toward a target and used their killing moves without holding back. Auk and Rant, who were under the illusion, didn't have any reaction at all. Night Serenity and Argentin took their lives in an instant. Seeing this scene, Caro and Bela revealed a look of awe. This method was really too terrifying. Two overlords of the body synthesis stage had died inexplicably just like that. Qinchuan, what do you think of my illusion? Luzi looked at Qinchuan with a smile and looked forward to Qinchuan's praise. Qinchuan glanced at Luzi and pondered for a moment before replying. Although the power of your illusion is quite strong, it's only effective against people like Auk and Rant who are all brawn and no brains. Ordinary people will be able to quickly discover the problem and find a way to break the illusion. Moreover, this illusion takes too long to activate and its purpose is too obvious. Ordinary people will definitely not give you this opportunity. Lu Zi, who was originally looking forward to Qinchuan's praise, couldn't help but look astonished when she heard Qinchuan's words. She stared at Qinchuan for a long while before suddenly reaching out to pinch Qinchuan's arm. Although Qinchuan didn't feel any pain, he still grimaced and played along to make Lu Zi happy. He knew that what he said just now wasn't very nice and was too harsh, but what he said was the truth. If the opponents weren't the two idiots Auk and Rant, it would be very difficult for Lu Zi to succeed. Qinchuan coaxed the fuming Lu Zi back to the spaceship. Night Serenity and Argentin followed closely behind, while Caro and Bela walked at the back. Even now, the two sisters still couldn't believe what they saw when they saw Auk and Rant corpses. Auk and Rant, who were almost invincible in front of them, were dead just like that. Sister, who are they? Bela was very curious about the identity of Qinchuan and his party. She was very eager to know where Qinchuan and his party came from. Caro shook her head and said to Bela, I don't know, but I'm sure that they're not ordinary people. Let's not ask too much. Knowing too much won't do us any good. Bela nodded slightly at Caro's words and stopped asking about the origins of Qinchuan and his party. Instead, she began to think about how they should live the rest of their lives. Great Wind Planet, Phone Clan. Due to the arrival of a secret report, the leader of the Phone Clan, Bao Long, called for a meeting among the higher-ups of the Phone Clan. All cultivators above the Dongshu stage were given the opportunity to participate in the meeting. When Bao Long announced the contents of the secret report, it caused a huge uproar. I'll kill Auk and Rant. You guys will take the blame. The territory belongs to you. Iron Tower clan cultivators below the Dongshu stage are not allowed to kill. This was the contents of the secret report. No one knew who sent it. At first, Bao Long didn't think much of it and only thought that it was a prank. However, when the other parties sent the photos of Auk and Rant's dead bodies in space, Bao Long couldn't sit still anymore. If the contents of the secret report were true, didn't that mean that as long as they showed up and wiped out the Iron Tower clan cultivators above the Dongshu stage, they would be able to obtain the territory of 200 galaxies? Silence. Bao Long shouted in a low voice. The noisy meeting instantly quieted down. Everyone looked at Bao Long and waited for him to speak. Facing everyone's gazes, Bao Long said indifferently, I've already sent people to investigate this matter. If it's true, it'll be a great thing for our Phone Clan. Their enemies were killed, and they gain a large territory. Was there anything better than this in the world? Leader, I suggest that we exterminate the Iron Tower clan. We can't give them any chance to turn the tables. Bao Long's face darkened when he heard this suggestion. Are you all blind? Didn't you see the contents of the secret report? Since the other party has the strength to kill Auk and Rant, do you think I can stop them? Hearing Bao Long's words, the leader of the Phone Clan who suggested exterminating the Iron Tower clan immediately broke out in cold sweat. He really wanted to slap himself to death. If Bao Long were to accept his suggestion in a moment of hot-headedness, it might bring disaster to the Phone Clan. Buzz! Bao Long's optical supercomputer suddenly vibrated. Bao Long immediately turned it on. When he saw the message he just received, he couldn't help but excitedly project the message for everyone to see. It's confirmed that Auk and Rant are dead. The Iron Tower clan is in chaos. Seeing this message, the entire Phone Clan celebrated. Bao Long looked at the cheering crowd and said in a deep voice, Elders, listen to my orders. Immediately select people and prepare to head to the Iron Tower planet. Prepare to take over the Iron Tower clan's territory. Also, do not attack the Iron Tower clan members below the Dongshu stage who don't resist. This is an ironclad order. Chapter 1166. Inside the spaceship, Karo and Bela stood in front of Qin Chuan somewhat cautiously, as if they didn't know what to say to Qin Chuan, but also wanted to say something. Qin Chuan looked at Karo and Bela's bashful expressions and chuckled. If you have anything to say, just say it. There's no need to hesitate. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Karo looked at Qin Chuan with a complicated gaze and asked, Sir, is there anything else you need us sisters to do? Qin Chuan smiled and replied, Not at the moment. Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, Karo's face showed obvious disappointment, while Bela lowered her head even more. Qin Chuan was a little surprised when he saw this and asked, Shouldn't you feel lucky? You're already free. Sir, we are indeed free, but we are now homeless. Karo smiled bitterly and said to Qin Chuan, We don't know where to go. Before this, Karo's mind was filled with thoughts of how to rescue Bela. But when they really rescued Bela, when they needed to think about the future, they found that they seemed to have nowhere to go. They couldn't go back to Meizu, and Rocky Star was no longer safe. After thinking about it, they found that the only place that could make them feel at ease now was by Qin Chuan's side, so they hoped that Qin Chuan could take them in, but obviously, Qin Chuan didn't seem to have this intention. Qin Chuan looked at Bela curiously and said, According to your description, Bela should be a very strong person, but why is the Bela I see a somewhat inferior and even cowardly person? Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Karo sighed helplessly and said to Qin Chuan, Sorry, Bela wasn't like this before. Qin Chuan looked at Karo and said, I understand what you mean, you want me to take you in. This isn't impossible, but I want to see a proud and strong Bela, not this weak and boneless Bela. Karo looked at Bela with some hesitation. She also wanted to see the Bela of the past, but in the past year, Bela had experienced too much pain, and the pride in her heart had long been wiped clean. Seeing Karo and Bela's silence, Qin Chuan said to the two, Karo, you can help Bela adjust her condition first. When the time is right, come and see me. Thank you, sir. Karo looked at Qin Chuan gratefully and then left with Bela. After Karo and Bela left, Luzi looked at Qin Chuan and asked, Have you already thought of keeping them? Qin Chuan shook his head and replied, Although it's cruel to tell the truth, keeping them by our side is reasonable. Other than being eye candy, there's no use in keeping them by our side. A peak insightful void cultivator and a peak insightful void cultivator were already a force to be reckoned with in an ordinary power, but in front of Qin Chuan, to be honest, they weren't worth his attention. Although Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were peak insightful void cultivators and peak insightful void cultivators respectively, their battle prowess couldn't be measured by the standards of ordinary cultivators. Knight Serenity and Argentin were overlords of the body integration stage, and Mysterious Snake was a peak body integration stage overlord. Each was stronger than the other, so Qin Chuan really didn't have much interest in Karo and Bela. But since Karo and Bela wanted to stay, Qin Chuan wouldn't refuse. However, Karo and Bela had to prove their worth. Qin Chuan didn't have much hope for Karo, but he was still somewhat interested in Bela. From Karo's description of Bela in the past, Bela should be a very strong, opinionated, and capable person. But when Qin Chuan really met Bela, he discovered that although Bela hadn't lost her virginity to Auk, her willpower had almost been destroyed by Auk. Such a Bela was almost equivalent to a cripple and had no value to Qin Chuan. These words were cold-blooded, but this was the bloody reality of the universe. Qin Chuan had never been a philanthropist. Apart from his own people, he had always sought benefits from others. If Bela could regain her confidence and find her past self, Qin Chuan didn't mind giving Bela a chance to be loyal to him. But if Bela couldn't do it, then they would part ways when they left the Holy Cluster. The spaceship stopped not long after leaving Iron Tower Planet. This was because Qin Chuan unexpectedly discovered that he had entered a wonderful state. There were faint signs of him breaking through to the peak of the Dongshu realm. On the third day of his stay in the universe, Qin Chuan finally woke up from that mysterious feeling. Following that, he welcomed his own small calamity. When they saw the 9 lightning bolts falling, Karo and Bela were extremely shocked. They had never seen 9 lightning bolts during a minor tribulation. Bela, is this also considered the mysterious Heaven 9-stage tribulation? Kara wasn't too sure. Did the mysterious Heaven 9-stage tribulation also exist in the minor tribulation? Shouldn't a normal person only go through 3 or 6 lightning bolts? Bela shook her head and said to Karo, I'm not sure either. But among the people I know, no one has ever gone through a minor tribulation with 9 lightning bolts. Karo turned to Bela and said with a complicated tone, Bela, we can tell Master that you went through the mysterious Heaven 9-stage tribulation when you were at the nascent soul stage. You're a genius and shouldn't be buried. Hearing Karo's words, Bela couldn't help but fall silent. Of course, she knew that she was a genius. However, it was because of this reputation that she and her sister got into trouble. If it wasn't for this, they wouldn't have left Meizu and become mercenaries wandering in space. Seeing Bela fall silent, Karo couldn't help but sigh. She knew that Bela must have suffered a lot in the past year. That was why she became like this. She really didn't want to see Bela sink into depravity. She hoped that she could save Bela from the shadow that Auk had created. Just as Karo and Bela were whispering to each other, Qin Chuan returned to the spaceship. What welcomed him was Lu Zi's congratulations. Congratulations, you're now at the same level as me. You finally caught up to me. Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qin Chuan smiled and said, I originally thought that breaking through from the peak of the Dongshu realm to the peak of the Dongshu realm would be difficult. But now, it seems that it wasn't the case. It was a little too easy. Chapter 1167. If others heard Qin Chuan's words, they would be so depressed that they would vomit blood. Many people were stuck at the peak of the Dongshu realm and couldn't break through to the exceptional Dongshu realm even after working hard for a lifetime. However, Qin Chuan broke through to the exceptional Dongshu realm not long after he broke through the peak of the Dongshu realm. It was as easy and natural as eating and drinking. He didn't encounter any obstacles at all. Maybe this was called showing off. Originally, Qin Chuan thought that after breaking through to the exceptional Dongshu realm, he would have some feelings about the form synthesis stage. But now he found that it was not the case at all. He was still confused about the form synthesis stage. Therefore, Qin Chuan called Argentine and Night Serenity over. In the past, Qin Chuan had never asked anyone what it was like to be in the form synthesis stage. It was not because he was not curious, but because it was meaningless and useless to know too much at that time. Now it was different. He had reached a realm where he could know these things. Qin Chuan looked at Night Serenity and asked, what's the difference between the form synthesis stage and the exceptional Dongshu realm? After hearing Qin Chuan's question, Night Serenity thought for a while and answered, in the exceptional Dongshu realm, the body is the body, the soul is the soul, and the spiritual power is the spiritual power. In the form synthesis stage, the body is the body, the soul, and the dantian is the spiritual power. After hearing Night Serenity's answer, Qin Chuan thought for a while and responded, so, in the form synthesis stage, the body, the soul, the spiritual power, and the dantian are all integrated into one. Night Serenity nodded and said to Qin Chuan, this is the form synthesis stage in my understanding. It's also the origin of the name, form synthesis stage. After hearing Night Serenity's answer, Qin Chuan was lost in thought. In the past, to advance from the Qi refining stage to the foundation stage, one only needed to lay the foundation. The real change was in the gold core stage. After the gold core stage, the gold core was born in the dantian. After the gold core stage, the nascent soul was formed in the yuanying stage, which was equivalent to having a second life. One could travel between heaven and earth with the help of the power of the yuanying stage. When one reached the deification stage, one had to comprehend the power of the Dharma. After that, in the Dongshu realm, the Yuanying stage, one could fight with the help of the power of the universe. In the previous realm, everything could be clearly separated. The physical body was the physical body, and the power released by the physical body was pure force. The spiritual power was the spiritual power, and it could be used to release spells. It could be used to take people's heads from thousands of miles away. The Dantian was used to store spiritual power, and the gold core was the source of spiritual power. The brain was used to store spiritual power, and it was the source of spirit. The meridians were used to allow the spiritual power to flow. All of these were clearly divided and organized. However, it was different in the form synthesis stage. Everything was mixed together. However, it was not simply mixed together. Instead, it was integrated into one, like rivers flowing into the sea. The strength of the form synthesis stage was no longer divided into physical strength, spiritual strength, and spiritual strength. It was pure strength. It could be spiritual strength, or physical strength. It could be spiritual strength, or physical strength. It could play a role in all aspects. Under the form synthesis stage, if one's physical body died, his soul could still transcend. However, above the form synthesis stage, once one fell, he would die directly. So was the form synthesis stage good? Of course it was good. Compared with the Dongshu stage, the form synthesis stage could be said to be a sublimation of life. There were too many benefits to count. After thinking about it, Qin Xuan turned to Argentin and asked, "What do you think about the form synthesis stage?" Argentin, who had thought about it carefully, replied to Qin Xuan's question, "In my opinion, the form synthesis stage is called the overlords of the universe because only the overlords of the form synthesis stage are qualified to be the masters of this universe. At least, they have the foundation and ability to do so. Everyone under the form synthesis stage is just a pawn. Of course, there are very few people as strange as you. According to common sense, the overlords of the form synthesis stage could absolutely crush the cultivators at the lower stages. However, Qin Xuan was a special case. He cannot be measured by common sense." Qin Xuan looked at Argentin and Knight Serenity. Then he asked, "What do you think is the most important thing to pay attention to if you want to reach the form synthesis stage?" Argentin replied without hesitation, "The power of law." Knight Serenity replied, "The fusion of power." Qin Xuan was slightly stunned by the two different answers. But soon, Argentin and Knight Serenity said in unison, "She's right." Qin Xuan turned to Knight Serenity and said, "You'd better explain it in detail." Knight Serenity nodded and said to Qin Xuan, "The form synthesis stage may be a complicated stage for the cultivators at the Dongshu stage. However, for the overlords of the form synthesis stage, this stage is much simpler than the other stages. First of all, the fusion of power. Once all the power is fused together, the cultivators at the Dongshu stage will naturally advance to the form synthesis stage. However, the form synthesis stage cultivators are the weakest kind of form synthesis stage cultivators. They have an absolute advantage over the cultivators at the Dongshu stage. However, they're very weak in front of the form synthesis stage cultivators like us who have fused the power of law." Qin Xuan was a little puzzled when he heard this. He asked, "You mean there are two stages of the form synthesis stage?" Knight Serenity nodded and then shook his head. He said, "Your understanding is not wrong. However, it is not completely correct. As I said, the biggest difference between the form synthesis stage and the Dongshu stage is the fusion of power. This fusion of power does not only include the powers I mentioned before. The power of law is also a kind of power." When he spoke up to here, Yu paused for a moment, and then he said to Qin Xuan, "However, you must be extremely careful when fusing with the laws." Seeing the serious expression on Knight Serenity's face, Qin Xuan's expression also became serious. He asked, "Is it because of the ultimate existence of the domain of law?" Yu nodded and said to Qin Xuan, "When it comes to fusing with the power of laws, because of the greatness of the existence of the highest level, if we fuse with the power of laws grasped by the existence of the highest level, then we will become the vassal of the existence of the highest level. When you face the existence of the highest level one day, you won't be able to resist at all and will become their servant. Even if you're unwilling, you won't be able to change it. Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Qin Chuan frowned and said, "Then how do we know if there is an ultimate existence in this domain of law?" "That depends on what kind of domain of law you choose." Knight Serenity said to Qin Chuan, "For example, the law of fire I chose does not have an ultimate existence in this domain of law because there is a feeling in the unseen world." Chapter 1168. After listening to Knight Serenity's explanation, Qin Chuan had a clearer understanding of the importance of the power of law to body integration stage cultivators. This was like participating in a job. Knight Serenity, who chose to fuse with the law of fire, was like a small business owner who started his own business. Perhaps there were many competitors in the field of law who wanted to swallow each other up, but Knight Serenity might not necessarily have no chance of becoming the leader. Choosing to fuse with a law that had already reached the pinnacle was like choosing a franchise store. Although you were the manager in name, there was a higher headquarters above you. All the things you sold in the store came from the headquarters. If the headquarters cut off your goods one day, then you could just wait to go bankrupt. However, this was only the worst-case scenario. Generally speaking, as long as the franchise store didn't cause trouble, there wouldn't be any problems. However, it was basically impossible to become the leader and replace the headquarters. As for body integration stage cultivators who didn't fuse with the power of law, although they were small business owners who started their own businesses, they didn't have a clear goal and were still in the exploration stage. Their overall situation was slightly better than Dongshu stage cultivators who weren't qualified to open a store, but there was a limit to it. Simply speaking, they were inferior to the top, but superior to the bottom. Qin Chuan's current situation was like a person who had a huge sum of money in his hands and was ready to open a store. However, he hadn't decided which line of business he wanted to go into yet. After thinking for a while, Qin Chuan asked Argentin, "What kind of law did you fuse with?" Argentin replied, "Silver light. It's considered the law of light. Similarly, there is no pinnacle existence in this law domain." Upon hearing this, Qin Chuan asked curiously, "Then how do I know if there is a pinnacle existence in the law domain I want to fuse with?" Hearing Qin Chuan's question, Argentin replied, "As far as I know, there are very few pinnacle existences in the universe. What I can be sure of is that there are pinnacle existences in every ancient powerful race that has existed until now. Furthermore, the law domains that the supreme existences of the ancient races control aren't a secret. As long as you avoid these law domains, you basically won't run into any supreme existences." Qin Chuan nodded gently and asked, "I know that the only true god of the Protoss, Atheist, controls the power of will. Perhaps it should be called the law of wishes?" The Tian people, on the other hand, controlled the power of oaths. What kind of power did the other ancient races possess? Argentin replied, "The ultimate existence of the Void Walkers is called the Void Walkers, and they control the law of void. The ultimate existence of the demons is called the Demon Emperor, and they control the law of evil. The ultimate existence of Zerg should be the legendary Zerg Queen, and they control the law of desire." Hearing Argentin's answer, Qin Chuan frowned slightly and asked, "Apart from these, are there any supreme existences in other law domains?" Argentin shook his head and replied, "At least in the current situation, there aren't any." Argentin said no, but Qin Chuan knew that the human emperor, the person called you, was still alive. The law of time was still under his control. However, Qin Chuan didn't say these things. Moreover, he didn't intend to fuse with the law of time, because he didn't comprehend the law of time at all. If Qin Chuan had to choose, he would definitely choose to fuse with the law of thunder. What about the Void Empire? What about them? Qin Chuan was a little curious and asked, "Are they like us and need to fuse with the law of time to advance to the third stage?" Hearing Qin Chuan's question, Argentin replied, "As far as I know, the Void Empire and the Void Empire have some connections. They should be of the same race, and the Void Spirit should be their common supreme existence. In the Void Empire, They're only void creatures, and what they fuse with should be the law of void. Qinchuan nodded and said, so, if you want to become a real overlord at the combination stage, you have to fuse all the power and the law of time into one, right? Argentin nodded and said to Qinchuan, but you can put aside the matter of fusing with the law of time for the time being. Think about how to fuse with the other powers first. Qinchuan nodded and said to Knight Serenity and Argentin, thank you for answering my questions. After sending off Knight Serenity and Argentin, Qinchuan looked at Lu Zi, who was sitting beside him, and asked, how do you feel now? Lu Zi smiled and said to Qinchuan, of course I want to fuse with the law of illusion. There are very few people in this field. Maybe I can become the supreme existence in this field. Qinchuan laughed and said, then I have to work hard. I don't know how many overlords at the combination stage in this universe have fused with the law of thunder, and how far they have gone. Ding dong. The doorbell of the room suddenly rang. Qinchuan subconsciously looked at the projection. When he saw Knight Serenity standing at the door, he opened the door and let Knight Serenity in. Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity curiously and asked, why are you back? Knight Serenity pursed his lips and asked Qinchuan, do you plan to fuse with the law of thunder? Qinchuan nodded and said, I do plan to do so. At this time, Qinchuan did not master many powers of law, but he was very proficient in all of them. As the law of thunder was the most suitable for him, it was naturally his first choice. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Knight Serenity looked at Qinchuan subtly and said, although everyone will choose one power of law as their main direction of attack when fusing with the power of law, I think you could try fusing with more power of law. Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity curiously and asked, why didn't you say that just now? Why did you come here alone to talk about this? Knight Serenity replied, because Argentin doesn't know that you have the true dragon bloodline. Because of the true dragon bloodline, you have a great advantage in the power of the law of space. If you fuse with the law of space when you advance to the combination stage, you have a great chance of becoming a demon emperor. The demon emperor that Knight Serenity mentioned was not the self-proclaimed demon emperor of the demon world in the land of exile, but the real demon emperor of all demons, a supreme existence. Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity and said, you still have something to say, right? Continue. Knight Serenity nodded and continued. You should have known that the law of space belongs to the demon race. To be exact, it is the inherited law of the true dragon race. It may not have had any special manifestations in the past, but when you advance to the combination stage and fuse with the law of space, your advantage in this aspect will be completely highlighted. It is not an exaggeration to say that your attainments in the field of the law of space will surpass others, and your progress in the combination stage will be extremely fast. This is the advantage of the inherited law. Chapter 1169. Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Qinchuan couldn't help but fall into contemplation. Knight Serenity wouldn't lie to him. That was to say, if he really chose to integrate the law of space, he would make rapid progress in the form synthesis stage with the help of the inheritance of the real dragon bloodline. At the same time, he would have a great chance of becoming a demon emperor. Everything would be smooth sailing for him. However, all of this was just Knight Serenity's speculation. No one knew what the real situation was. However, Knight Serenity was right about one thing. If Qinchuan wanted to be stronger than others in the form synthesis stage, he had to integrate more law of space. As for biting off more than he could chew, Qinchuan didn't care about that for the time being. Thank you for your advice. Qinchuan smiled and said to Knight Serenity, do you think it's more suitable for me to integrate the law of space? Knight Serenity thought for a while and then replied, the more, the better. Knight Serenity and Qinchuan had known each other for a long time. When Qinchuan had just awakened, he was only at the early Dongshu realm. However, in just a few years, Knight Serenity had witnessed Qinchuan's breakthrough from the early Dongshu realm to the peak of the Dongshu realm. In just a few years, Qinchuan had walked a path that others might not be able to complete in thousands of years. From this, it could be seen that Qinchuan's talent was very strong. As for Qinchuan's future, Knight Serenity certainly hoped that Qinchuan would be as strong as possible. And with Qinchuan's talent, Knight Serenity believed that Qinchuan could integrate at least 3 law of space. If Qinchuan could really integrate 3 law of space, then Qinchuan would definitely be able to maintain his strong performance in the Dongshu realm. It would still be a common thing for him to fight those at a higher realm. At this moment, Knight Serenity couldn't wait to see Qinchuan, who was only at the early Dongshu realm, challenge those at the peak of the Dongshu realm or even the peak of the Dongshu realm. Seeing that Knight Serenity was so confident in him, Qinchuan smiled and said, "I'll think about it seriously." At this point, Yu had nothing more to say. She turned to Qinchuan and said, "If that's the case, I'll take my leave." After Knight Serenity left, Qinchuan's eyes turned to LV and asked, "What do you think of Knight Serenity's suggestion?" LVZ thought about it seriously and replied, "To be honest, I think it makes sense. You can't be measured by common sense, so naturally, you can't be measured by common sense." Qinchuan nodded slightly and said, "Among the law of space that I've mastered, I'm only proficient in the law of thunder. Although I've dabbled in the other law of space, I only know a little about them." Hearing Qinchuan's words, LVZ suggested, "Then let's integrate the law of thunder and the law of space." Qinchuan pondered for a moment and asked LVZ, "What do you think of the law of time?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, LVZ looked at Qinchuan in surprise and said, "Are you crazy? You know that the human emperor is still alive, so why are you thinking about the law of time?" Qinchuan pursed his lips and said, "But if he's still alive, the human race will never have any hope. The only hope is to defeat him in the law domain." "You can't do that." LVZ shook her head without thinking and said, "If you really do that, do you think he'll give you a chance to grow?" LVZ was almost certain that if Qinchuan really did that, then Qinchuan would only have 2 paths to take. The first was to become a vassal of the human emperor and never be able to rise again. And the second was to be strangled in the cradle by the human emperor. LVZ had great confidence in Qinchuan, but this didn't mean that she believed that Qinchuan could challenge the human emperor when he was only at the combination stage. This was even more unreliable than striking a rock with an egg. Seeing LVZ's firm opposition, Qinchuan smiled and said to LVZ, "Don't be too nervous. I haven't even touched the surface of the law of time, so I don't have a chance to fuse it." Seeing Qinchuan smile, LVZ couldn't smile. She was really afraid that Qinchuan would do something stupid. "Don't worry, I won't take the risk." Qinchuan held LVZ's hand and said, "I won't do something stupid without being absolutely sure." LVZ nodded gently and said to Qinchuan, "If you don't want to make a decision, you must tell me." After learning more about the combination stage, Qinchuan began to try to fuse the various powers in his body. However, this wasn't something that could be done overnight. It would take time and research. Everyone's situation was different, so Qinchuan had nothing to learn. While Qinchuan was exploring his cultivation, the spaceship arrived at the Great Moon Nebula of the Holy Cluster. The Great Moon Nebula was a nebula directly under the jurisdiction of Zerg. However, the Great Moon Nebula wasn't Zerg but Meizu. The reason Qinchuan and the others came to the Great Moon Nebula wasn't because of Karo and Bela, but because they had found out that Zerg's forces that destroyed Tron Nebula were transported back to the Sage Monarch continent, the core of the Holy Cluster, through the Great Moon Nebula. When Karo and Bela found out that Qinchuan and the others were going to the Great Moon Nebula, they had mixed feelings. They had left the Great Moon Nebula more than 100 years ago. Now that they had returned, everything had changed. LVZ found Karo and Bela and asked them gently, "Can you tell me about your past in the Great Moon Nebula?" "Qinchuan didn't ask me to ask you this. I'm just curious." "Of course, you can choose not to tell me." Karo hesitated for a moment in response to LVZ's question. She then looked at Bela and asked, "Bela, what do you think?" Bela lowered her head and said softly, "It's okay." Karo turned to look at LVZ and sighed. "It's a long story. Bela and I are actually princesses of Meizu." LVZ was surprised to hear Caro's words. She didn't expect Caro and Bela's origins to be so complicated. 140 years ago, there was a turmoil in the Great Moon Nebula. During that turmoil, the leader of Mezu, the father of Bela and I, mysteriously disappeared. Our mother died in an accident. Without a leader, our uncle was elected as the new leader of Mezu. Bela and I thought that the disaster was over, but we didn't expect that it was just the beginning. After becoming the new leader of Mezu, our uncle, Iacos, set his eyes on Bela and wanted to give Bela to the tyrants as a gift. He wanted to form an alliance with the tyrants and raise the status of Mezu in the Holy Cluster. When we found out about this, we were naturally against it. However, Iacos ignored us and even threatened Bela with killing me. It was also at that time that we found out that our father's disappearance and mother's death were not an accident. Chapter 1170. At the mention of her parents' accident, Caro's face flashed with hatred. It was Iacos who plotted everything. He was the one who destroyed Bela and my family. He destroyed our family for his own selfish reasons. Lucy looked at Caro sympathetically and asked, "Has Iacos caused any trouble for you all these years?" Caro shook her head. Bela and I ran far away. His tentacles couldn't reach the Great Moon Nebula. That's why we spent the past 100 years outside. At this point, Caro paused and looked at LVZ with a subtle gaze. If it weren't for you coming to the Great Moon Nebula, perhaps Bela and I wouldn't have come back for the rest of our lives. For Caro and Bela, the Great Moon Nebula used to be their home, but it was also a place of sadness. Before they had the power to take everything back from Iacos, they didn't want to come back and face it. Caro and Bela didn't even think about using Qinchuan to take back everything that belonged to them. They knew that before they had any more value to him, Qinchuan wouldn't help them. Lucy looked at Caro and said, "The reason we came to the Great Moon Nebula is because Zerg's troops used it to return to the Sage Monarch continent. We wanted to investigate the situation." Caro thought for a moment, then said, "If you want to investigate this matter, you'll have to cross paths with the Mezu. The teleportation portal from the Great Moon Nebula to the Sage Monarch continent is controlled by the Mezu. However, it doesn't belong to the Mezu. The Mezu is only responsible for guarding it." She nodded and asked Caro, "You should know a lot about the Mezu. Where do you suggest we start?" Caro thought for a moment, then turned to Bela and said, "Bela, you should know better than me what to do." Bela was silent for a moment, then said to Lucy, "My former teacher was in charge of guarding the teleportation portal. She must know something about it, but I can't guarantee that she still cares about us." Lucy asked curiously, "Can you tell me more about your teacher?" Bela nodded. Then she turned to Lucy and said, "My teacher's name is Jessie. She's the strongest swordswoman in the Mezu. Back in the day, she was in the peak of the insightful void stage. She hasn't reached the body fusion stage yet, otherwise I would have heard about her. If she hadn't covered for me and my sister, we wouldn't have been able to escape the Great Moon Nebula. After we settled down, we asked around about my teacher. It was said that Iacos wanted to kill my teacher to vent his anger. However, my teacher had many students in the clan and was highly respected. Iacos wanted to stabilize his rule over the Mezu, so he couldn't do anything to my teacher. Otherwise, the Mezu would definitely fall apart. This was something he didn't want to see, so he demoted my teacher to guard the teleportation portal. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. The job of guarding the teleportation portal is very boring. I don't know if my teacher is still the same after 100 years, but I can try to contact my teacher." Hearing Bela's words, Lucy nodded and said to Bela with some emotion, "Your teacher doesn't have it easy either. I'll have to trouble you this time." After Lucy left, Caro looked at Bela and said, "Do you really want to contact Teacher Jessie?" Bela nodded and said, "If there's anyone in this world who can help me find myself again, it must be Teacher Jessie." Bela longed for change. Lucy returned to Qinchuan and said to Qinchuan, "I've asked around. They have some connections in the Great Moon Nebula, and they happen to be the officers guarding the teleportation portal. They should know something about Zerg." Hearing Lucy's words, Chuan nodded slightly and said, "But I see that you don't look too good. What's wrong?" Lucy sighed and said, "Caro and Bela's experience is really tragic." Lucy immediately told Chuan the story of Caro and Bela. After hearing Lucy's description, Chuan sighed and said, "This is the fate of people." Lucy looked at Chuan and said, "Actually, our experience back then was worse than Caro and Bela's. We were almost exterminated. But fortunately, we had you. You protected all of us." Chuan chuckled and said, "If you want to praise me, just be direct. Don't beat around the bush. Be reasonable. I think you're right." Lucy rolled her eyes and said, "You're the only one who knows how to praise yourself." Lucy sat down beside Chuan and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Chuan pondered for a moment and said to Lucy, "Let Bela contact her teacher first. If we directly attack Yakos, we might alarm Zerg, so I don't want to do it unless it's absolutely necessary." Lucy nodded and said, "If the investigation results are out, what do you plan to do?" Chuan thought for a moment and said, "I have to do something memorable." The core of the Great Moon Nebula was a mountain-like continent called Mount Great Moon. The city of Mount Great Moon was built on the mountain and had distinctive features. The airport of Mount Great Moon was located at the foot of the mountain. Chuan and the others were outsiders, so they could only move around the outer ring at the foot of Mount Great Moon. If they wanted to enter the middle ring, they had to pay a high entrance fee. As for the inner ring, it was the private territory of the Meizu. Other than the Meizu's people, no one else could enter. Chuan and the others first found a hotel to stay. Then Bela tried to contact Jessie. "I've sent the email. If teacher sees it, she might reply to me. Maybe we'll be exposed." Although Bela had deep feelings for Jessie, she was not sure if Jessie still had feelings for her after so many years. What she was most worried about now was that not only would she not be able to help Chuan, but she would also cause trouble for Chuan. Chuan smiled and comforted Bela. "It's okay. Even if the Meizu comes out to encircle us, we can still retreat easily." Buzz. Just as Chuan was talking, Bela's optical computer suddenly received an email, and the sender was Jessie. Chapter 1171. On the peak of the inner ring of the Great Moon Mountain, a figure in black armor stood on the edge of the cliff, looking in the direction of the foot of the mountain with a complicated expression. There was joy, surprise, and more than that, worry on his face. Jessie did not expect that after more than 100 years, the student she was proud of would contact her again. "Bela, it's been so many years. How have you been?" Jessie murmured in a low voice. "Have you come back for revenge?" But Yakos is no longer the Yakos of the past. Looking at the address attached to the optical computer's email, Jessie hesitated for a moment. Finally, she decided to meet Bela in person. If possible, she hoped that Bela could put aside her hatred and leave the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible. "Sir, it's time to arrange the guard for next month." As Jessie's deputy, Kalen had always been helping Jessie with all his heart. At the same time, he was also monitoring Jessie because he was the person Yakos had arranged to be by Jessie's side. More than 100 years had passed, but Yakos had never given up on finding Bela. Hearing Kalen's words, Jessie was silent for a moment. Then, she said, "I want to rest today. Kalen, you can arrange the guards for me." Kalen looked at Jessie with some surprise. Since Jessie came here, this was the first time that she wanted to rest. However, after seeing the vicissitudes of life on Jessie's face, he suddenly understood Jessie. After so many years, Jessie should be very tired. She was once the #1 swordsman, but now she could not hold on any longer. Kalen did not associate Jessie's rest with Bela's return at all. He had been monitoring Jessie for more than 100 years. Bela and Jessie had never contacted each other, and Jessie had never had any problems. Although it was strange that Jessie suddenly wanted to rest today, he did not think that it was because of Bela's return. "Yes, sir. Please rest well. I will arrange the rest." Kalen left. After everything was arranged properly, he would report this matter to his superiors. As for what decision and reaction the superiors would make, it was not something that he could interfere with. When night fell, the outer ring of Great Moon Mountain was still very lively. In this world where cultivators walked everywhere, there was no such thing as having to sleep and rest at night. When Jessie, who had changed into plain clothes, appeared in the outer ring, she did not attract anyone's attention. The world had long forgotten this former #1 swordsman. Maewa Hotel. This is the place. When Jessie walked into Maewa Hotel, Knight Serenity, who had been waiting here for a long time, suddenly appeared beside Jessie. She looked at Jessie, who was on guard, and said lightly, "I am Bela's friend." Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Jessie was a little surprised. She could see that Knight Serenity was an overlord of the combination stage. She did not expect that Knight Serenity was Bela's friend. No wonder Bela had the courage to come back. It turned out that she had a helper. Even so, she still did not think highly of Bela. "Come with me." Knight Serenity turned and walked toward the elevator. Jessie followed Knight Serenity into the elevator. The two of them were silent all the way. Neither of them spoke. When Jessie returned to the room and saw Bela, she was finally moved. The two of them hugged each other excitedly. Caro, who was standing beside them, could not help but burst into tears. "Teacher, I thought I would never see you again in my life." Bela hugged Jessie tightly and breathed in the familiar smell of Jessie. She had been with Jessie since she was very young. Now, she had found the familiar feeling of the past. "Bela, my Bela, you shouldn't have come back." Jessie burst into tears. She could not bear to leave Bela, the student she was once proud of, but Great Moon Mountain was really too dangerous. Bela shook her head and said, "Teacher, you don't have to worry about me. I'll be fine." Jessie looked at Bela and sighed. "I thought you had already reached the form synthesis stage. That's why I dared to come back." Now, it seems that it was not the case. As she spoke, Jessie looked at Qin Xuan and the other strangers and asked Bela, "Are they all your friends?" Bela glanced at Qin Xuan and then said to Jessie, "I was rescued by this lord. He is my leader." Then, Bela told Jessie what had happened some time ago. When Jessie heard what had happened, she could not help but be shocked. She had heard about what had happened on Planet Iron Tower. She had thought that it was the Wind Clan who had done it, and had even sighed at how powerful they were. She had never thought that they were just scapegoats. The real culprit was right in front of her. "Thank you for saving Bela. She's a pitiful child." Jessie bowed to Qin Xuan. She really felt sorry for Bela. Her life had been full of hardships, and it had not been easy for her. Qin Xuan calmly said, "There's no need to thank me, Jessie. We didn't invite you here just for you to catch up with Bela. We have something we want to ask you." Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Jessie said to Qin Xuan, "Please ask. If it's something I know, I'll definitely tell you." Qin Xuan looked at Jessie and said, "You've been guarding the teleportation portal to the Sage Monarch continent all these years, haven't you?" Jessie nodded. "Yes, I've been guarding the portal for 140 years. This is the first time I've ever left." Qin Xuan immediately asked, "Then a few years ago, Zerg sent a group of people back to the Sage Monarch continent through the portal on Mount Great Moon. You must know about it, right?" Jessie was surprised to hear Qin Xuan's question. "You're here for the Sacred Ones?" "Zerg," Qin Xuan said, looking at Jessie. "This is very important. Please answer." Jessie looked at Bela and saw Bela nod. "That's right. About 3 years ago, Sage, Zerg used the teleportation portal on the Sage Monarch continent to get to Mount Great Moon. After leaving for a while, he used the portal to get back to the Sage Monarch continent." Qin Xuan took a deep breath and asked, "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary? For example, did you notice someone special among them?" Jessie recalled for a moment, then nodded and said, "At that time, when they entered the teleportation array, they did indeed bring along a rather special person. This person was especially weak only at the nascent soul stage, so I had a very deep impression of him." Qin Xuan and Lu Zi's breathing quickened at Jessie's answer. Their guess was correct. Chapter 1172. Qin Xuan suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked Jessie, Do you still remember the appearance of that nascent soul stage cultivator? Jessie shook her head and replied, At that time, he was imprisoned in a cage. I only sensed his aura, but I didn't see his appearance. Hearing Jessie's answer, Qin Chuan sighed softly and said in a low voice, Very good, but that's not important. Yes, it was no longer important to Qin Chuan, who was captured by Zerg. Because he knew that such a thing had happened, his guess was correct, and his identity had been exposed. That was enough for him. After asking a few simple questions, Qin Chuan didn't intend to continue asking. Seeing this, Jessie said to Qin Chuan, My lord, since you have the results of the investigation, can you take Bela and the others away from the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible? Seeing the almost pleading expression on Jessie's face, Lu Zi was a little puzzled and asked, What are you afraid of? Yakos? I don't think he has the ability to threaten us. Jessie sighed and said to Lu Zi, You don't understand how terrifying Yakos is. Lu Zi smiled and said calmly, You don't understand how terrifying we are either. Seeing Lu Zi's confidence, Jessie looked at Qin Chuan subtly. After seeing that Qin Chuan was indifferent, she said to Lu Zi, But the Meizu today is no longer the Meizu of 100 years ago. The current Meizu has at least 5 overlords of the body integration stage. 5 overlords of the body integration stage. Hearing Jessie's words, everyone's faces showed a touch of surprise. Even Bela and Karo were no exception. Teacher, how can there be 5 overlords of the body integration stage in the Meizu? Bela was very puzzled. 100 years ago, there was only one Iakos. Jessie sighed and said, That's why I said you don't understand how terrifying Yakos is. In just over 100 years, he forcibly raised the strength of 4 of his trusted subordinates to the body integration stage. That's too exaggerated. Lu Zi was in disbelief. How can Yakos have such a powerful ability? Even Qin Chuan, who was originally not interested in this matter, was now full of curiosity. He wanted to know how Yakos did it. Could it be that Iakos also had some special bloodline? In the face of everyone's curiosity, Jessie fell silent for a moment. Then, she looked at Bela and Karo and said softly, Do you know why Iakos suddenly betrayed us, framed your parents, and even killed them? Although Karo and Bela knew that Iakos was behind those things, they didn't know why Iakos did it. Now it seemed that Jessie knew. Teacher, what's going on? This question had been in Bela's heart for more than 100 years. She had to get to the bottom of it today. Jessie looked helplessly at Bela and said, Iakos suddenly betrayed us because he found a way to help others quickly advance to the form synthesis stage. This caused his ambition to soar rapidly. He was no longer willing to submit to your parents. What kind of ability is that? Karo couldn't help but ask. What did he do? Jessie pursed her lips and said, A rune stone. He found a rune stone. When everyone heard Jessie's words, they were all shocked. They had thought of many possibilities, but they had never thought about rune stones. Qin Chuan, who was originally just a little curious, was now full of interest. He loved rune stones the most. Almost everyone present had heard of the legend of rune stones. Legend had it that anyone who obtained a rune stone could easily advance to the form synthesis stage and become an overlord of the universe. Iakos, who had obtained a rune stone, was able to advance 4 people to the form synthesis stage in a short 100 years. It didn't seem to be something that was hard to believe. Qin Chuan looked at Jessie and said, How did you know about this? When Jessie heard this, she looked at Qin Chuan with a complicated expression and said, This rune stone originally belonged to Bela's parents. As their trusted aide, I was supposed to be the first to use it. However, Iakos took the rune stone away and killed Bela's parents. When I heard the news, it was already too late. There was nothing I could do except to keep this secret and live on. When Bela and Karo heard Jessie's words, they couldn't help but be shocked. However, this shock quickly turned into intense hatred. They trembled and suppressed the anger in their hearts. If they could, they really wanted to tear Iakos apart. That bastard. He's our uncle. How could he do such a thing? Karo roared in a low voice. Her face was filled with pain and anger. Bela held Caro's hand tightly and said through gritted teeth, "I want revenge. I want to avenge my dead parents." Jessie shook her head at Bela and said, "No, you're still too weak. Iacos has a total of 5 form synthesis stage overlords, while you only have 2. The difference is too great. Moreover, as far as I know, Iacos is already at the mid-form synthesis stage. He's even about to advance to the late-form synthesis stage." When they heard Jessie's words, Bela and Caro couldn't help but show a touch of despair. In the face of such a powerful Iacos, if they went to seek revenge now, it would be no different from courting death. In the face of such a force, Qinchuan would definitely not be willing to help them. When she saw the despair on Bela and Caro's faces, Jessie sighed helplessly and said, "Leave this place, children. Come back when you're strong enough. I believe that you'll definitely be able to succeed in your revenge. However, now is not the time." Originally, Jessie thought that after she revealed this information, Qinchuan and the others would be afraid of Iacos and leave the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible. However, she didn't expect that Qinchuan was not frightened at all. Instead, he became excited. "Jessie, have you seen that rune stone? How big is it?" When she heard Qinchuan's question, Jessie was stunned for a moment. Then, she replied, "It's very big. It's a cylinder with a diameter of about 20 centimeters and a length of about 1 meter. It's really beautiful." Qinchuan almost couldn't help but whistle. A rune stone more than 1 meter long was bigger than any rune stone he had obtained before. In fact, it was much bigger. It was definitely a great supplement for the rune sword. Chapter 1173. Seeing the joyful expression on Qinchuan's face, Jessie couldn't help but ask, "You want that rune stone?" Qinchuan chuckled and asked, "Can I?" Seeing that Qinchuan was really interested in that rune stone, Jessie shook her head and persuaded Qinchuan, "I'd advise you to give up on that unrealistic idea. Iacos regards that rune stone as very important and will never leave his side. If you want that rune stone, you'll have to defeat Iacos in a direct confrontation. With your current strength, this will be very difficult." Jessie wasn't trying to boost the morale of others and put down her own prestige. Instead, it was because Qinchuan's group had Argentin, followed by Knight Serenity, who was a mid-body integration stage overlord and an early body integration stage overlord respectively. On the other hand, Iacos had a total of 5 body integration stage overlords, including Iacos, who is infinitely close to the late body integration stage. If Qinchuan's group wanted to clash with such a force, they'd need at least 3 body integration stage overlords to help them. However, these 3 body integration stage overlords couldn't be found anywhere. Qinchuan looked at Jessie's serious expression and smiled. "You don't have to worry about that. I have a way to deal with Iacos. You just need to tell me how to find him." Seeing that Qinchuan was so stubborn, Jessie couldn't help but frown. "Don't you need to ask for the opinions of others?" Jessie felt that Qinchuan was too arrogant and egotistical. More importantly, when Qinchuan said those words, no one had any intention of refuting Qinchuan. Could it be that these people were all crazy? Are they just going to let Qinchuan do whatever he wants? Knight Serenity smiled at Jessie's puzzled expression and said to Jessie, "Although our cultivation levels seem to be higher than his, we're all his subordinates. We have to follow his decisions, even if it sounds unreasonable." Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Jessie looked at Qinchuan in a different light. A person who could be protected by 2 body integration stage overlords definitely wasn't an ordinary person. Perhaps he was a key figure of a great power or even the successor of an ancient powerful clan. However, when she looked at Qinchuan's face, she couldn't associate Qinchuan with the ancient powerful clan's clansors. Seeing Jessie's puzzled look, Qinchuan smiled and said to Jessie, "You don't have to think or ask too much. Just tell me how to find Iacos. You don't have to worry about anything else." Jessie hesitated for a moment, but finally answered Qinchuan's question. "Iacos is in the inner circle of the Great Moon Mountain. He's in his private cultivation room. It's the tallest building in the inner circle. It's easy to find." Jessie was worried that something would happen to her if she stayed here, so she left quickly. After Jessie left, Caro asked Chinchuan, "Are you really going to find the echoes?" Chinchuan nodded and said to Caro, "That talisman stone should have belonged to your parents. Now that your parents are gone, you should inherit it. However, I want that talisman stone, so I'll give it to you as a thank you gift for avenging you. How about that?" Hearing Chinchuan's words, Caro smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, if you want that talisman stone, Bela and I will definitely not fight for it. However, this is really dangerous." Chinchuan smiled and said to Caro, "I've encountered more dangerous situations than this. This is nothing." At this point, Chinchuan looked at Bela, who finally raised her head. He saw the deep hatred in Bela's eyes and said faintly, "Hatred is a very powerful force. With this force, you can become stronger, but at the same time, you can also turn into a demon. I hope that you can stay true to yourself and not let hatred get to your head." Hearing Chinchuan's words, Bela looked at Chinchuan with a complicated gaze and said, "If I want to kill Iacos with my own hands, will you agree?" Chinchuan nodded and said to Bela, "I'll leave him with one last breath." "Thank you." Bela looked deeply at Chinchuan and said, "After this, my life is yours." Chinchuan smiled and pointed at Lu Zi, who was sitting at the side, and said, "You can talk to her about this." In the inner ring of the Great Moon Mountain, Iacos' private cultivation room. Iacos was sitting on a soft sofa, holding a glass of red wine that had been collected for thousands of years. He gently sipped and savored the taste. He seemed to be enjoying himself very much. He liked this feeling. He was in control of everything and didn't have to listen to anyone, at least in the Great Moon Mountain and the Great Moon Nebula. In front of him, on the open ground, four cultivators in the exceptional insightful void stage were meditating on a cylindrical talisman stone. These four people were Iacos' most trusted subordinates. They were the second batch of cultivators in the Great Moon Mountain who could meditate on the talisman stone. They would become the 6th, 8th, and 9th overlords of the form synthesis stage in the Great Moon Mountain. After the second batch of cultivators successfully reached the form synthesis stage, Iacos would start to invade the outside world and seize territory. He wanted to expand and make the Mezu a big force in the Holy Cluster, second only to the Holy Clan. This was his ambition. With the Talisman Stone, he had enough capital to support his actions and fulfill his ambition. Patriarch, Kalen sent a message. Jessie has left the transmitting formation. A subordinate standing behind Iacos suddenly leaned over and whispered in Iacos' ear the information he had just received from Kalen. Hearing his subordinate's words, Iacos was slightly stunned. Then, he remembered who Jessie was. Jessie had disappeared from his world since Jessie was sent to guard the transmitting formation more than 100 years ago. Now that she was mentioned again, he recalled some of the things that had happened in the past. This old woman has been obedient for more than 100 years. Finally, she can't stand it anymore. Marco smiled coldly. He had already forgotten about Jessie's existence. Since Jessie had taken the initiative to jump out, he could get rid of Jessie. It could be considered as settling a knot in his heart. Now that the Mezu was completely under his control, and Jessie's prestige had already fallen to the lowest point. Killing Jessie would not pose any threat to his rule. No one would even know that Jessie was dead. Iacos took a sip of red wine and said indifferently to his subordinate, "Tell Curtin to find Kalen and wait for Jessie to return. Kill Jessie and bury her on the mountain." At this point, Iacos paused for a moment, then said, "Also, find out where Jessie went. I'm guessing that my lovely nieces should have returned." Chapter 1174. Dong. A dull sound suddenly came from the top of the cultivation room. Iacos, who was tasting wine, raised his head subconsciously and looked up. He frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and see what happened, Dong." Another extremely muffled sound rang out, but this time a protrusion actually appeared on the sturdy roof of the cultivation room. It looked like a fist imprint. Bang! Finally, when the third violent sound was heard, the roof of the training room was blasted open. A beautiful figure covered in black and purple scales broke in through the hole and landed on the ground of the training room. Iacos looked at the figure standing in front of him with gloomy eyes and asked, "Who are you?" Iacos was very angry. He didn't expect that someone could avoid all the monitoring devices and guards in the manor, break the defense array of the cultivation room, and even the roof, and appear in front of him in such an arrogant and ridiculous way. Knight Serenity smiled in the face of Iacos' question. She didn't answer Iacos' question. She turned her head and looked at the rune stone that was protected by 4 cultivators in the exceptional insightful void stage, and asked, "Is this the rune stone? It's really big." Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Iacos understood that the other party must have come for the rune stone. At the same time, the manor was filled with the sound of alarms. Obviously, someone had broken into the manor. It seemed that this person was in the same group as the person in front of him. Whoosh! Several figures appeared behind Iacos and looked at Knight Serenity cautiously. They were Iacos' most loyal subordinates. At the same time, there were also the first group of people to reach the form synthesis stage with the help of the runestone. Curtin, who was supposed to kill Jesse at the teleporter, pursed his lips and said to Iacos, "Family head, I didn't find Jesse when I went to the teleporter. Also, Kalen is already dead." Hearing Curtin's words, Iacos smiled playfully and said to Knight Serenity, "It seems that you came prepared. Tell me, how many people do you have?" "Not many. We're all here." The person who answered Iacos was not Knight Serenity, but Qin Chuan, who had just walked in from the front door of the cultivation room. He casually threw the bodies of the 2 guards on the ground and walked to Iacos with a smile. Looking at Qin Chuan, who was only at the peak of the insightful void stage, Iacos felt a little funny. He didn't expect that after so many years of seclusion, his first opponent would be a cultivator at the peak of the insightful void stage. Since when could a little guy at the peak of the insightful void stage be so arrogant? "You're very interesting." Iacos looked at Qin Chuan. He felt that Qin Chuan was either a fool or had nothing to fear. So until now, he didn't have the intention to attack Qin Chuan. Anyway, he already had victory in his hands. As long as he gave the order, this farce would be over soon. However, Qin Chuan didn't have the intention to chat with Iacos. He glanced at Knight Serenity and said, "Go and keep the rune stone." The reason why Knight Serenity came here alone was to prevent Iacos from taking the rune stone. After all, Iacos' strength couldn't be underestimated. If Iacos took the rune stone in advance and Iacos escaped, then their efforts would be in vain. Knight Serenity nodded and walked towards the rune stone. Seeing this, Iacos' expression became extremely gloomy. Qin Chuan didn't pull him in his eyes at all. "You guys were invited here by Bela and Caro, right? Jesse went to see you guys today." Iacos looked sharply at Qin Chuan and said in a deep voice, "You have the guts to meddle in our Meizu's affairs. Aren't you afraid of death?" Qin Chuan chuckled and said, "Originally, I couldn't be bothered with this matter. But who asked you to have something in your hands that I want?" Looking at the smile on Qin Chuan's face, Iacos felt extremely disgusted. He snorted and said to Curtin, "Go, break his limbs." Hearing Iacos' order, Curtin appeared in front of Qin Chuan in a flash. When he released the pressure of a combination stage overlord on Qin Chuan without any scruples, Qin Chuan didn't seem to feel the pressure at all and smiled. Bang! When Curtin punched Qin Chuan's shoulder and tried to shatter Qin Chuan's shoulder, he found that his strength was like a stone sinking into the sea. It didn't even cause a splash. At this moment, the expression on Curtin's face changed. He realized that something was wrong, but it was too late for him to get away from Qin Chuan at this time. Leifa Qianjun. Accompanied by a fierce thunder, Curtin's chest was penetrated by Qin Chuan's Leifa. The violent power of thunder wandered around Curtin's body. Curtin didn't even have time to scream before he died under Leifa. Plop! Curtin's body fell straight to the ground. Looking at Curtin's body, the expressions on the faces of Iacos and the others were extremely stiff, extremely shocked, and even at a loss. A guy at the peak of the insightful void stage actually killed Curtin, who was at the form synthesis stage. How is this possible? For Qinchuan, this was a very simple matter. After all, Curtin was only an overlord at the form synthesis stage who had merged his strength into one. He wasn't an overlord at the form synthesis stage who had merged his strength with the power of law. Such a person could only crush ordinary cultivators at the insightful void stage. In front of Qinchuan, Curtin was just a piece of cake. Qinchuan glanced at the dead Curtin, then looked at Iacos and sighed. I was curious about how miraculous the rune stone was. It turns out that it can only help people to quickly merge their strength. How can a cultivator at the form synthesis stage be called an overlord? Hearing Qinchuan's words, the people who were shocked by Curtin's death came back to their senses. Everyone looked at Qinchuan with eyes full of horror. Qinchuan could kill Curtin in an instant. This meant that Qinchuan could also kill them in an instant. How could they not be terrified? Iacos stepped forward. At this time, if he didn't step forward, the morale of the people would completely collapse. Qinchuan killing Curtin in an instant was indeed a little shocking, but he absolutely didn't believe that Qinchuan could kill him in an instant. He was an overlord at the form synthesis stage who had truly merged with the power of law. Moreover, he was an overlord at the middle stage of the form synthesis stage. Boy, if you tell me your background now, maybe I can spare your life. Iacos was ready to attack. If Qinchuan couldn't give him a reason to negotiate, he would kill Qinchuan without hesitation and ruthlessly crush Qinchuan. Chapter 1175. Qinchuan chuckled at the gloomy Iacos and said, I don't have any background. If you have the ability, then kill me. Boom! As soon as Qinchuan finished speaking, an extremely astonishing force suddenly erupted from Iacos' body and rushed towards Qinchuan. The unguarded Qinchuan was sent flying and crashed into the wall of the cultivation room, breaking through the wall and escaping. When Night Serenity saw this scene, she frowned slightly as she was putting away the rune stone. When she thought of Qinchuan's previous instructions, she decided to stand aside and watch for the time being. In the ruins, before Qinchuan could stand up, Iacos' figure had already appeared in front of him. He raised his hand and punched out. Qinchuan subconsciously used the lightning escape to dodge the punch, narrowly avoiding it. Rumble. Although Iacos' punch didn't hit Qinchuan, it shattered the ground. The entire manor seemed to have experienced a violent earthquake, causing a large area to collapse. Qinchuan stood in the air in the distance and looked at Iacos with a grave expression. Iacos' strength was stronger than the average mid-heavenly integration stage overlord. At the very least, Argentin shouldn't be a match for Iacos. Iacos slowly raised his head and looked at Qinchuan. When he saw that Qinchuan wasn't injured apart from being a little dirty, he was a little surprised. This was because the strength of Qinchuan's physical body didn't seem like that of a cultivator at the peak of the insightful emptiness stage at all. Qinchuan and Iacos looked at each other and grinned. Again, in the face of Qinchuan's provocation, Iacos' expression suddenly turned cold. He raised his hand and punched towards Qinchuan. When Qinchuan saw Iacos raise his hand, he already sensed danger. When Iacos punched, Qinchuan had no time to dodge. He growled, and a golden rune array suddenly appeared in front of him. Level 6 defensive rune array, immovable golden light. Kacha! The golden light shattered. Qinchuan took this opportunity to increase the distance between him and Iacos. At this moment, Iacos' figure appeared in front of Qinchuan in an extremely strange manner. He raised his hand and punched out. Bang! 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 Qinchuan had no chance to dodge and had no choice but to face Iacos head-on. However, Qinchuan's counterattack didn't have any effect on Iacos at all. It only barely blocked Iacos' attack. Lu Zi, who was watching the battle from afar, couldn't help but frown when she saw this scene. She whispered, "Why is Iacos so strong?" Lu Zi originally thought that Qinchuan would be able to defeat Iacos easily and defeat Iacos in an instant. However, judging from the current situation, Qin Chuan didn't seem to have any intention of defeating Iacos in an instant. Moreover, Iacos wasn't someone who could be defeated so easily. Jessie didn't know what to say when she heard Lu Zi's words. After all, Qin Chuan was only at the peak of the insightful emptiness realm, while Iacos was an overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage. It was already very difficult for Qin Chuan to not be killed by Iacos in an instant, and even barely block Iacos' attack. Lu Zi actually said that Iacos was so strong. Shouldn't she be asking why Qin Chuan was so monstrous? Argentin glanced at the battle between Qin Chuan and Iacos, then said to Lu Zi, although Qin Chuan has the strength to fight above his level, the problem is that Iacos isn't an ordinary overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage. His strength has been strengthened by rune stones. The most important thing is that Qin Chuan didn't use any killing moves. Instead, he relied on his own strength to fight head-on with Iacos. As a veteran overlord of the celestial cluster, Argentin's vision was naturally higher than Lu Zi's. From Lu Zi's point of view, Qin Chuan seemed to be suppressed by Iacos and was beaten up a little miserably. However, from Argentin's point of view, Qin Chuan's performance was already very strong. If Qin Chuan used Lei Fa, Sky Splitter, Skylight, Sky Sword, etc., would Iacos still be able to suppress Qin Chuan? It would be good enough if he wasn't killed in an instant. After hearing Argentin's words, Lu Zi's slightly worried mood was slightly relieved. She knew that Qin Chuan was training himself, but she was worried that Qin Chuan wouldn't be able to control the situation well and would be injured by Iacos. On the other side, Caro and Bela saw Qin Chuan fight for the first time. This time, they were completely shocked by Qin Chuan. How can he be so strong? Bela couldn't believe it. Even though she saw it with her own eyes, she still found it hard to believe that Qin Chuan was so strong that he could fight head-on with the overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage, Iacos, with his strength at the peak of the paradise realm. If she was the one facing Iacos, she would have probably reported to the 9 underworlds by now. She wouldn't even have the chance to report to the 9 underworlds. I don't know either. Although Caro knew Qin Chuan earlier than Bela, she and Jessie had always thought that Qin Chuan was an important figure in some big force. She had never thought that Qin Chuan's actual combat strength would be so strong. At this moment, if there was anyone who was the most shocked, it would be Iacos. As the person who was fighting with Qin Chuan, no one knew better than him how strong and terrifying Qin Chuan was. He had lived for more than 1,000 years, but this was the first time he met such a freak at the peak of the paradise realm. Hey, is this all you have? Qin Chuan smiled at Iacos, his face full of disdain and provocation. In the face of Qin Chuan's provocation, Iacos was furious. He roared and finally used the power of law, the law of water. Qin Chuan suddenly felt countless water droplets appearing around him. These water droplets gathered and wrapped around Qin Chuan. In the face of Iacos' murderous intent, Qin Chuan finally stopped testing Iacos. He also used his true ability and used the law of space to devour the water droplets around him. However, what surprised Qin Chuan was that the devouring speed after the space collapsed was slower than the formation of water droplets. Sky piercing. Qin Chuan had no choice but to use the sky piercing to break the lake that had gathered around him and rush out. Seeing this, Iacos' expression became extremely distorted. He didn't expect that Qin Chuan would still have a way to escape after he used the power of law. He was really angry this time. Ocean. Following Iacos' roar, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly appeared in a vast ocean. The undercurrent swept and attacked Qin Chuan heavily. In just a moment, Qin Chuan was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. However, Iacos' attack did not stop there. He raised his finger again at Qin Chuan and said in a deep voice, "Water explosion." As Iacos' voice fell, the vast ocean suddenly compressed into a ball and then suddenly exploded. Boom! Whoosh! Like a thunderclap, it was followed by a torrential downpour. Chapter 1176. The heavy rain blurred everyone's vision and also compressed their perception range. Everyone was extremely anxious and nervous. They were all worried about Qinchuan's safety. Iako's sudden killing move was too strong. Crash! The rain finally stopped. When the heavy rain stopped, everyone immediately looked at Iako's, who was standing in the air, but Qinchuan had disappeared without a trace. Even his aura could not be sensed. This, Lu Zi's eyes widened. She did not believe that Qinchuan would be killed by Iako's. Don't worry, the contract between me and him hasn't been broken. He's still alive. Argentin, who was standing beside Lu Zi, comforted Lu Zi. She was also curious about where Qinchuan had gone. Hearing Argentin's words, Lu Zi's heart, which was in her throat, finally settled down. She looked around and then asked Argentin, "Can you find where he is through the contract? Did Iako's kidnap him?" "It shouldn't be." Argentin shook her head. "Iako's doesn't seem to know where Qinchuan has gone." Lu Zi subconsciously looked at Iako's. Sure enough, Iako's had a suspicious look on his face at this time. He looked around and opened up his perception. He seemed to be looking for Qinchuan. Although he was very confident in his previous move, he always felt that Qinchuan would not die so easily. Kacha kacha. Just as everyone was looking for Qinchuan, the space in the center of the water explosion suddenly shattered. A ragged figure walked out of it. Everyone was stunned when they saw this figure. What is this? Did he just enter a different space? Argentin's eyes widened. She could not believe it. She had never seen anyone who could enter a different space and come out unscathed. Argentin was not the only one who was shocked by Qinchuan. Everyone present was shocked by Qinchuan. Every one of them had more or less mastered the law of space. Some of them could even make space collapse. However, no one had ever dared to enter a different space after a space collapse, because no one who entered could come out alive. But now, they saw a person walk out of a different space with their own eyes. "Are you a monster?" Iako's was frightened. He wanted to know what kind of monster he was fighting with. This guy was only at the exceptional void realm. How could he display such terrifying power? Qinchuan grinned at Jax and said, "Just treat me as a monster." In fact, Qinchuan had a lingering fear at this time. He had underestimated Iako's. If he did not hide in the different space in time, even if he did not die in the water explosion, he would have been seriously injured. As for why he could come out of the different space unscathed, it involved a relatively ancient secret. In the past, it was not that no one could come out of the different space alive, but every person who came out was of the bloodline of the true dragon. As the inherited law of the true dragon, no one in the universe understood the law of space better than the true dragon. Qinchuan happened to be one of the few people in the world who had the bloodline of the true dragon. He was also the only person who could enter a different space and come out unscathed. However, with Qinchuan's current strength, he could only stay in the different space for a while. If he stayed for too long, he would be torn apart by the different space. Today's test is over. Qinchuan already had a rough idea of the limits of his current combat strength. He did not want to continue testing Iako's. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Iako's seemed to have thought of something. But before he could do anything, a black ring suddenly appeared at his waist. It was a strange phenomenon caused by the collapse of space. Without any warning, Iako's body was cut into two. Marcos lowered his head to look at his legs that were falling to the ground. His face was filled with fear, and he couldn't help but let out an extremely terrified scream. His voice was hoarse. Not only was Iako's shocked by this sudden change, everyone else was also stunned by this move. A mid-heavenly integration stage overlord was cut in half at the waist just like that. The only person who was not shocked was Qinchuan, because he was the one who used this move to cut Iako's in half. As Qinchuan's cultivation level continued to increase, his attainments in the law of space also became deeper and deeper. Not long ago, when he broke through to the peak of the insightful void realm, he mastered this move that could cut Iako's in half silently. Space Slash. It was a very casual and ordinary name, but its lethality was incomparably shocking. Even a powerful overlord like Iakos was not aware of it beforehand. How terrifying! Qin looked at Iakos, who was screaming in pain, and sighed softly. This move not only cut Iakos' body into two, but it also completely cut Iakos' body into pieces. The reason why Iakos was screaming in pain was because he was completely pulverized. This was probably like splitting a living person into countless cells in an instant. This level of pain was definitely not something an ordinary person could endure. Qin sighed softly and said to Bela, who was not far away, "Hey, didn't you want to kill him with your own hands? Then do it now, he's going to die in a while." Hearing Qin's words, Bela seemed to have woken up from a dream. She glanced at Iakos, who was screaming in pain, and the suppressed hatred in her heart immediately surged up, almost swallowing her completely. "Iakos, go to hell!" Bela roared and rushed towards Iakos, who had already lost the ability to resist. With a punch, Iakos' body split apart prematurely and turned into ashes. At this time, Qin had already returned to Lu Zi's side. He held Lu Zi with one hand and whispered, "Hold on to me. Let's go back to the spaceship and leave this place." After holding Qin's hand, Lu Zi immediately sensed that Qin was weak. She immediately realized that it was not easy for Qin to use the space slash earlier, and it was even a little forced. Immediately, she did not care about what others thought and directly pulled Qin back to the spaceship. "Don't worry, I won't die, and I'm not injured either. I'm just exhausted." Qin sighed. He was helpless. These killer moves that he had mastered, whether it was the flipping sky seal or the space slash, always liked to drain the energy from his body. The feeling of having all the energy in his body drained in an instant was really, really uncomfortable. Hearing Qin's words, Lu Zi pursed her lips and said, "Don't be so stubborn in the future." Qin nodded and said, "This is just an experiment. Now that I know the results, I won't do such a stupid thing again." Chapter 1177. Qin and Lu Zi returned to the spaceship, leaving the aftermath to Argentine and Night Serenity. Although Iakos still had 3 overlords in the form synthesis stage, they were no match for Argentine and Night Serenity. Soon, they were defeated by Argentine and Night Serenity and were killed by Bela. After settling these matters, Night Serenity looked at Bela and said, "You can choose now. Stay or leave with us." Now that there were no more overlords in the form synthesis stage in the Meizu, the strongest one left was Jesse. If Bela and Kero stayed, it wouldn't be difficult for them to regain control of the Meizu. However, if they chose to leave together, they might not have the chance to return to the Meizu in the future. This wasn't Night Serenity's decision, but Qin's. Now, he was giving Bela a chance to choose. After hearing Night Serenity's words, Bela fell silent. In the current Meizu, apart from her teacher Jesse, she didn't have any feelings for anyone else. However, no matter what, this was her former home. It was really difficult for her to completely cut off all ties with it. However, if it weren't for Qin, she might still be Ox plaything. Kero would probably have met with misfortune. Jesse would still be guarding the teleportation array, and Iakos would still be at large. She wanted to regain her freedom and take revenge, but it was still far away. Therefore, she wanted to repay Qin and stay by Qin's side to work for him. "Bela, go." At this moment, Kero came to Bela's side and reached out to hold Bela's hand. Her expression was complicated, but also very gentle. Bela looked at Kero, pursed her lips, and didn't say anything. Kero looked at Bela and said, "I know you. I've known you since you were young. You're a person with a greater future. You shouldn't be tied down by these things in the Meizu. Don't worry. I'll stay and rebuild our home with teacher Jesse." After hearing Kero's words, Bela whispered, "Sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't let you bear these things alone. I'm your elder sister, so there's nothing wrong with letting me take responsibility for these things." Kero gently stroked Bela's blue hair and whispered, "Go. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't miss it. Jesse walked over and said to Bela, "Go. We'll always be proud of you." After hearing Jesse's words, Bela finally made up her mind. She said to Caro and Jesse, "Sister, teacher, I'll definitely come back." On the spaceship, when he saw Bela again, Chuan could clearly feel that Bela was completely different from before. In his first impression, Bela was a girl whose pride and dignity had been destroyed. She had become weak and self-abased. But now, after Auk and Iakos had been torn apart, Bela had become strong and powerful again. The pain of the past had now turned into strength in her body. "Thank you, sir." Bela looked at Chuan firmly. "I'm willing to follow you and pledge my loyalty to you." Faced with Bela's attitude, Chuan smiled faintly and said, "You've made the right choice. Moreover, I can see that you're about to reach the form synthesis stage." Bela was naturally gifted. If it weren't for Iakos' sudden betrayal and Auk's covetousness, Bela should have already reached the form synthesis stage. After going through these hardships, Chuan believed that Bela would definitely become stronger than when she reached the form synthesis stage 100 years ago. Hearing Chuan's words, Bela nodded gently and said to Chuan, "I do have this feeling. The power in my body is gradually fusing, and my power of law is also fusing." The power of law that Bela mastered was the law of water, the same as Iakos. Chuan nodded and said to Knight Serenity, "Let's get out of here and find a more desolate place to let Bela break through." At Chuan's command, the spaceship moved slowly toward the other end of the universe. Although the battle on Mount Great Moon had alarmed many people, no one knew what had happened, and no one connected it to the events on Planet Iron Tower. Everyone thought that these two events were of no importance, but some people actually connected the two events together. Northwest of the Sage Monarch continent, on a planet filled with huge caverns, a sharp screech suddenly erupted. A huge black figure rushed out of the caverns and opened its mouth, which was full of tiny teeth, and roared angrily. Whoosh! Dozens of figures rushed over from the distance and landed next to the black figure. They frowned and looked at it, but it was impossible to tell what they were thinking. Thousands of years have passed, and the devil bug has been waking up more and more frequently. It seems that something is making it very irritated and angry. A one-legged figure slowly walked to the edge of the cave, looking at the roaring devil bug with a slightly dignified gaze. Since the incident more than a decade ago, this was the third time the devil bug had awakened, and this awakening was far more irritating and disturbing than the previous two times. After the devil bug vented its anger, it slowly twisted its huge body and looked at the one-legged magistrate with its dozens of evil and ferocious eyes. It opened its mouth and let out an ear-piercing scream. After hearing the devil bug scream, the one-legged magistrate couldn't help but frown slightly. He didn't expect the devil bug to wake up again for the same reason as the previous two times. "Mr. Devil, are you saying that you can sense the aura of the guy who made you lose 2 apostles?" The devil bug screeched again at the magistrate in response. "I know what to do, Mr. Devil. This time I won't let that guy escape." After being comforted by the one-legged consul, the demon worm slowly retreated into the cave. When the demon worm's aura disappeared, the one-legged consul turned to look at the people behind him and said indifferently, "He's here." "Your Excellency, who are you talking about?" The one-legged consul sneered. "It's that guy, the guy who killed 2 apostles of the devil bug in succession. I really didn't expect him to have the guts to appear in the Saint Star cluster. It seems like he doesn't know what he has done in the past. Your Excellency, what should we do?" The one-legged consul did not speak. He was waiting. When a finger-sized devil bug jumped out of the cave and landed on his palm, he said to everyone, "Follow the devil bug's avatar, find that person, and bring him back." Chapter 1178. 10 days later, the spaceship arrived at an extremely remote galaxy within the jurisdiction of the Great Lunar Nebula. Here, Chuan and the others found a deserted planet where Bela would undergo her tribulation and advance to the form synthesis stage. During these 10 days, the power in Bela's body had completely integrated into one and could trigger the thunder tribulation at any time. If not, Qin Xuan would have wanted to fly further and go to a more remote place. Everyone stood in the air and looked at Bela in the distance. They were all looking forward to seeing Bela become the third overlord in their team. However, in terms of combat strength, she might be ranked 5th. Qin Xuan, you don't have much time left. Luzi looked at Qin Xuan with worry in her eyes. According to Qin Xuan, he would not be able to continue suppressing the Lotus of the Void after 3 years. At that time, he would be eroded by the power of the Void and become a Void creature. Now, they had left the Celestial Cluster for several months. Qin Xuan had less than a year left. If Qin Xuan could not advance to the form synthesis stage in less than a year, it would be really troublesome. Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qin Xuan smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm doing." Seeing that Qin Xuan was not worried at all, Lu Zi could not do anything. She could only hope that Bela's tribulation could give Qin Xuan some inspiration and let Qin Xuan gain something. Whoosh! The wind whistled and dark clouds gradually appeared. They gathered above Bela's head and turned into tribulation clouds. Large patches of tribulation clouds covered the sky, and almost half of the planet was shrouded in them. When thunder rolled in the tribulation clouds, everyone knew that Bela was about to begin her tribulation. Looking at the tribulation clouds in the sky, Qin Xuan was a little curious and asked, "Do you think that the thunder tribulation, a natural force of heaven and earth, is also a kind of power of law? Is there anyone who can control it?" Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Knight Serenity looked at Qin Xuan subtly and said, "If there is, you may not be able to reach this stage in terms of the law of thunder." Qin Xuan looked at Knight Serenity and said, "Do you think my law of thunder and the tribulation clouds we are seeing now are the same kind of power of law?" Knight Serenity asked in return, "Is it not?" Qin Xuan heard Knight Serenity's words and looked at Argentin and asked, "What do you think?" Argentin pondered for a moment and replied, "I think they should be the same, but not exactly the same. To be specific, they should be 2 different branches. Above them, there should be an origin." Hearing Argentin's words, Qin Xuan couldn't help but fall into deep thought. If the law of thunder was a branch of certain law domain, then what kind of power of law would this origin be? Qin Xuan's thoughts were quickly interrupted because Bela's tribulation had arrived. The loud roar woke him up. For the well-prepared Bela, transcending the tribulation wasn't a very difficult thing. At least, the first 5 lightning tribulations didn't have any effect on Bela. As Bela's aura became stronger and stronger, everyone's worries about Bela also lessened. It's already 6 lightning tribulations. Lu Zi said to Qin Xuan, "From now on, with every lightning tribulation, Bela's potential will increase by a bit." Qin Xuan nodded and said, "I really hope that Bela can transcend the mysterious Heaven 9 stage tribulation." Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Lu Zi looked at Qin Xuan helplessly. This guy really didn't forget to praise himself at all times. Speaking of which, Qin Xuan did indeed have the qualifications to do so. Rumble. The 7th lightning tribulation fell, but the tribulation clouds showed no signs of dissipating. This made everyone regard Bela even more highly. Bela, who could transcend at least 8 lightning tribulations, had a very high chance of breaking through to the highest realm in the future, the tribulation passing stage. Under everyone's expectant gazes, the 8th lightning tribulation came as scheduled. However, what made everyone feel regretful was that after the 8th lightning tribulation, the tribulation clouds gradually dissipated. Although Bela's talent was high, she didn't attract the mysterious Heaven 9 stage tribulation. When the tribulation clouds completely dissipated, Bela looked up at the sky and couldn't help but cry out in excitement. She had been looking forward to this day for a long time. Now, she had finally transcended the lightning tribulation and reached the form synthesis stage. In Bela's original plan, after she reached the form synthesis stage, she planned to settle the score with Auk and then take revenge on Iakos. However, now that Auk and Iakos were dead, she had already taken her revenge. Therefore, what she wanted to do now was to protect Qin Chuan and repay his kindness. Bela came back. She came to Qin Chuan's side and looked at Qin Chuan with excitement. She said, "Until now, I feel that I have the qualifications to be loyal to you." Although Qin Chuan was only at the exceptional void stage, Bela had witnessed the battle between Qin Chuan and Iacos. She knew very well that Qin Chuan was a genius who couldn't be measured by common sense. The stronger she became, the deeper her reverence for Qin Chuan in her heart. "Congratulations." Qin Chuan smiled and said to Bela, "I'm afraid that your movements here will attract some people's attention. Let's go back to the spaceship and leave this place first." Everyone followed Qin Chuan's words and returned to the spaceship. At this time, Bela's optical computer suddenly received a video call request from Caro. When Bela accepted the video call request, she was surprised to find that the person on the other side was not Caro, but a mysterious person covered in a black shell. Warrior Zerg. Seeing this figure, Bela's expression suddenly became serious. She said in a deep voice, "Who are you? Who I am is not important. What's important is that your sister is in my hands. You don't want her to go to hell, right?" Zerg looked at Bela coldly and said, "I want to see that person." Bela knew that the person he was talking about must be Qin Chuan. For Caro's safety, she should immediately go to Qin Chuan. But now, she was hesitant. She was worried that this matter would drag Qin Chuan into a whirlpool of trouble. She wanted to repay Qin Chuan, not take revenge on Qin Chuan. "What are you hesitating for?" Zerg snorted. "Even if you don't tell that person, I still have a way to contact him." Bela knew that Zerg was telling the truth. In the Holy Cluster, if Zerg wanted to investigate a person, that person would have nowhere to hide. It was impossible for her to help Qin Chuan hide from Zerg's investigation. "I'll go find him. But first, I want to make sure that my sister is safe." Zerg did not have any objections. He dragged the tied-up Caro over and said to Bela, "Don't worry. As long as you do as I say, she will be safe." Chapter 1179. In the face of Zerg's threat, Bela finally found Qin Chuan. When Bela told Qin Chuan about the situation, she was surprised that she did not see any surprise or anger on Qin Chuan's face. "I knew this day would come. I've been waiting for it." Zerg's reaction is still a bit slow. When Qin Chuan decided to come to the Holy Cluster, he was already mentally prepared for his identity to be exposed and to be discovered by Zerg. Because in all of his plans, there was one of the most dangerous and crucial parts, and that was to make use of the threat posed by Zerg to once again tap into his own potential and use this life-or-death crisis to break through his current realm and reach the body fusion stage. And Zerg waited until now to discover him, which was indeed a bit slow and delayed his plan. Bela always knew that Qin Chuan did not have any good feelings towards Zerg, but she never thought that Qin Chuan was actually waiting for Zerg to discover him. At this moment, Bela was very curious. What kind of grudge did Qin Chuan have with Zerg? Qin Chuan took Bela's photon computer and sent a video call to Caro's photon computer. Soon, the call was connected, and the face of an unfamiliar Zerg warrior appeared in front of Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan did not reveal his real face. He wore a cloak and said to the Zerg warrior, "I heard that you're looking for me." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, the Zerg warrior frowned and said, "Take off your hood." Qin Chuan laughed and said, "You're not qualified to see my face. Find someone else to talk to." The Zerg warrior was furious and said to Qin Chuan, "You're looking for death." Qin Chuan sneered and said, "You think you can do anything to me just because you captured Caro?" The Zerg warrior was about to say something when he was pushed aside by another figure. It was a figure covered in a dark green shell. His face was rough and his eyes were fierce. He stared at Qin Chuan as if he was looking at prey. "I'm his commander, the deputy commander of the Holy Clan's Devil Army, Ink Ghost." Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qin Chuan looked at Ink Ghost indifferently and did not say anything. Ink Ghost looked at Qin Chuan deeply and said, "You killed 2 of Mr. Devil's apostles. You must pay the price." Qin Chuan was stunned for a moment. He thought that his identity was exposed, and that was why Zerg found him. But from what Ink Ghost said, it did not seem to be the case. As for apostles, he was even more confused. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Qin decided to test Ink Ghost because it seemed to be a very interesting thing. Ink Ghost snorted and said, "You don't have to hide it. This matter can't be hidden. 14 years ago, you killed 2 of Mr. Devil's apostles. There can't be a mistake." Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qin could not help but think of the black-robed man who died in his hands because of the rune stone, and the black-robed woman who released the Zerg King and almost destroyed the sane state. If he guessed correctly, these 2 people were the apostles of Mr. Devil that Ink Ghost mentioned. In other words, Ink Ghost did not know that he was Qin. He was a human. Seeing Qin fall silent, Ink Ghost thought that Qin had admitted it. He said, "You have nowhere to go now. In the Holy Cluster, your whereabouts have been completely tracked. If you go back to the Great Moon Mountain, you may still have a chance to live." Qin sighed and said to Ink Ghost, "I know. Before that, don't hurt my friends." After saying this, Qin did not give Ink Ghost a chance to continue speaking. He hung up the video call and turned off the optical computer. After doing all this, Qin looked up at everyone. Seeing their strange looks, he smiled and said, "Why are you looking at me?" Bela looked at Qin with a complicated expression and said in a low voice, "Actually, you don't have to go back. I believe that my sister won't blame you. If you didn't save us, my sister and I would be living a life worse than death." Qin smiled and said to Bela, "You've misunderstood. I will go back, but not for your sister. I will go back because of Zerg." Others may not understand Qin, but Lu Zi could understand Qin. She heard the conversation just now and knew that Zerg did not recognize Qin's true identity at all. He only looked for Qin because of some other things. Therefore, Qin wanted to go back and give Zerg a heavy blow. Although it was very refreshing to do this, it was also accompanied by a huge risk. "Qin, are you sure you want to do this? When the time comes, you may not be able to hide it anymore." Lu Zi looked at Qin and said, "But I respect all the decisions you make and will fully support you." Qin turned his head and looked at Lu Zi and said softly, "This is a very good opportunity." This time, Qin came to the Holy Cluster just to walk around and see the situation in the Holy Cluster. But when he learned the truth about the destruction of the city of Trump, what he wanted to do was no longer as simple as just looking around. He wanted to find an opportunity to teach Zerg a profound lesson. Now, this opportunity was in front of him. Zerg did not know his true identity. Even if he valued him, there was a limit. He could use this information gap to catch Zerg off guard. Before leaving the Holy Cluster, he would kill as many Zerg as he could. "You're too reckless." Bela looked at Qin seriously. "The Holy Clans can close the interstellar portal at any time, and then they'll close the door and beat us up. Although I don't know what your identity is, we won't be able to hide it when the time comes. Don't think about these problems." At this moment, Night Serenity suddenly interrupted everyone's conversation. When Qin turned his head and looked at Night Serenity said in a deep voice, "We're surrounded. Zerg is here." Zerg spaceships gathered from all directions and surrounded the spaceship Qin and the others were on. Thousands of Zerg soldiers were ready to charge. As the commander of this operation, Ink Ghost looked at the desperate spaceship and could not help but sneer. "Do you think I will obediently wait for you to come back at Mount Great Moon? How naive." From the beginning to the end, Ink Ghost did not think that he could use Caro to threaten Qin to return to Mount Great Moon. The previous call was just to make sure that the target was still there. Ink Ghost stood up and said to the deputy beside him, "Send a message to the consul. We have surrounded the enemy and are ready to attack at any time. Please give instructions." Chapter 1180. Qin turned on the spaceship's security system. Looking at the dozens of Zerg spaceships surrounding the spaceship, his expression turned serious. He realized that he had underestimated Zerg. Due to his carelessness, They had fallen into Zerg's encirclement. It looked like a big battle was inevitable. Everyone was looking at Qin Chuan, waiting for Qin Chuan to make a decision. Whether it was to fight or to break through, they would listen to Qin Chuan. Get ready for battle. Qin Chuan slowly turned around and looked at the crowd. At this moment, he had already sorted out his emotions and appeared calm and composed. Lu Zi looked at Qin Chuan and asked, "Are we going to defeat them head-on?" Qin Chuan nodded and said to Lu Zi, "This is just Zerg's vanguard. They will have reinforcements later. There's no point in us breaking through now. It will only make the situation worse. Therefore, the best way is to defeat this Zerg's vanguard and then fight with Zerg's reinforcements." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Argentin was confused and asked, "How do you know this is just Zerg's vanguard?" This question was not only Argentin's question, but everyone else's as well. They want to know how Qin Chuan knew this was just Zerg's vanguard. That ink ghost just introduced himself. He is only the vice commander of the demon officer. There must be a commander above him. Now that they are surrounding us, but not attacking, there are only two possibilities. Either they are waiting for the commander to give the order to attack, or they are waiting for reinforcements to arrive. My guess is that they are waiting for the order to attack, and it is also true that they have reinforcements. Hearing Qin Chuan's explanation, everyone's expression turned ugly. If what Qin Chuan said was true, then it would be difficult for them to escape unscathed. Seeing the change in everyone's expression, Qin Chuan smiled and said, "Of course, maybe my guess is wrong. But no matter what, we still have to fight Zerg before we can leave." Qin Chuan did not give anyone a chance to speak and said, "Let's not waste time. Don't give Zerg the chance to prepare for Zerg. We will kill our way out and find Ink Ghost. Let's deal with him first." Yes, everyone roared in agreement, and their faces were filled with determination. Boom! The battle broke out without warning. Argentin rushed toward the left side of the insectoid ship. A silver light poured out, and the entire insectoid ship melted in an instant. On the other side, Knight Serenity transformed into a first-generation sky dragon. He opened his mouth and spat out several dragon breaths, which landed accurately on the insectoid ship. Along with the explosion and burning of flames, screams could be heard one after another. Compared to Iako's, Bela's attainments in the law of water were obviously higher. The power of her water explosion was also more powerful. When the entire insectoid ship exploded, it also affected the two surrounding insectoids, causing countless casualties. Qin Chuan and Lu Zi did not take action. They stood in the air and watched Knight Serenity and the other two kill their way out. They were waiting for Ink Ghost to appear. Ink Ghost was very surprised. He did not expect Qin Chuan and the others to have the courage to take the initiative in such a difficult situation. Moreover, it seemed that the results were quite good. At least, their encirclement had been broken and their losses were quite heavy. Pass down the order. Let Maruing, Lu Zi, and Hu Te attack. Following the demon's order, Maruing, Lu Zi, and Hu Te, the three mid-stage unification stage overlords, immediately attacked. They each rushed toward their chosen opponents and fought Knight Serenity and the other two. The destructive power caused by the battle of 6 unification stage overlords was extremely shocking. The other insectoid ships had to retreat to leave enough space for the battlefield. They're entangled. Lu Zi turned to look at Qin Chuan and asked, "What should we do?" Qin Chuan smiled slightly and said to Lu Zi, "To catch bandits, first catch the king. Although Ink Ghost is not the real king, he's still a small one." While talking, Qin Chuan had already rushed straight to the insectoid ship in the middle of the insectoid fleet. Just now, he clearly saw Maruing and the other two rush out from this insectoid ship. There was a high probability that Ink Ghost was also in this insectoid ship. When Qin Chuan moved, the demon, who had been paying attention to his every move, couldn't help but sneer. He admired Qin Chuan's courage, but at the same time, he liked such a stupid opponent. Let Igu and Inu stop these two little guys. Remember, don't kill them. Igu and Inu attacked together and went straight to Qin Chuan and Lu Zi. Facing the attack of these two mid-stage unification stage overlords, Qin Xuan didn't have any intention of retreating. He didn't even have the thought of fighting back. When a hazy purple light poured down and enveloped Igu and Nu, the two's movements immediately became sluggish, and a trace of confusion appeared in their eyes. Qin Xuan seized this momentary opportunity and rushed straight over. Lei Fa shot out from his left and right hands, directly blowing up Igu and Inu's heads. Accompanied by a series of explosions, the two mid-stage unification stage overlords fell. This scene was witnessed by many Zerg warriors. This short exchange of blows shocked every Zerg warrior. Even Ink Ghost was stunned. Ink Ghost thought that sending out two mid-stage unification stage overlords to deal with these two little guys at the peak of the insightful void stage was already a sign of how important they were. But now, it seemed that he was wrong. In fact, he was even ridiculously wrong. He had seriously underestimated Qin Xuan and Lu Zi's combat strength. There's something wrong with that purple light released by that woman. There's also something wrong with that lightning in that guy's hands. It's too lethal. Ink Ghost saw the problem. So this time, he sent out the remaining three mid-stage unification stage overlords to deal with Qin Xuan and Lu Zi separately. He himself was going to personally take care of the situation and attack at any time. When he saw Ink Ghost leading the three of them out of the insectoid ship, Qin Xuan transmitted his voice to Lu Zi. They're out in full force. Get ready. Lu Zi nodded slightly and replied, I understand. As she spoke, Lu Zi poured all her strength into the purple star divine eyes above her head. The purple star divine eyes immediately emitted an extremely dazzling light, dyeing the dark universe a faint purple. Ink Ghost looked at the branch that suddenly grew out of his shoulder. It was a budding purple flower, and he couldn't help but reveal a look of horror on his face. By the time he realized that something was wrong and wanted to break the branch, it was already too late. Meng Manji, as Lu Zi shouted softly, all the people who were enveloped by the purple light and had branches growing out of their bodies fell into a deep sleep. As long as the branches didn't wither and disappear, these people couldn't wake up. Chapter 1181. Whether it was Argentine, Night Serenity, or Bela, they were all stunned by Lu Zi's move. Even Qin Xuan, who had already communicated with Lu Zi, was shocked. He didn't expect Lu Zi's move to be so terrifying that it could make thousands of people fall into a deep sleep in an instant. Among them were several mid-stage combination overlords, and even Ink Ghost, who was a late-stage combination overlord. Hurry up. I can't hold on for long. When Lu Zi's reminder sounded in everyone's ears, everyone woke up from their daze and attacked one after another. Argentine, Night Serenity, and Night Serenity almost instantly killed Maruing, Night Serenity, and Night Serenity. Qin Xuan originally wanted to kill Ink Ghost, but the branches on Ink Ghost's body were very short, and they were withering at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Qin Xuan didn't hesitate any longer. He directly attacked the three mid-stage body integration stage overlords closest to him. At the same time, he used his lightning technique to insta-kill the three of them. At the same time, he tried to use his space-piercing technique on Mo Gue. Unfortunately, Ink Ghost was completely awake at this time and dodged the attack. Mo Gue stood in his original spot, looking at the three subordinates that had died at Qin Xuan's hands. His expression was extremely dark. He had never imagined that the battle that he had personally led with 8 mid-stage body integration overlords to encircle Qin Xuan's group, which should have been a surefire victory, would have such a huge mishap. Ink Ghost couldn't help but look at Lu Zi, whose aura had become very weak, and said in a deep voice, I must kill you. Whoosh! A ghostly shadow flew out from Ink Ghost's hand and appeared in front of Lu Zi almost instantly. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced on Lu Zi. Lu Zi subconsciously took out her heavenly Luo umbrella to defend herself, but the ghostly shadow easily tore the umbrella apart and slammed into Lu Zi's body. When the ghostly shadow disappeared, Lu Zi's aura instantly became chaotic. Sometimes it was evil, sometimes it was normal. It was extremely strange. Qin Chuan didn't expect this to happen. By the time he wanted to remedy the situation, it was already too late. This ghostly shadow is a pet that I have carefully cultivated for many years. It can devour people's flesh, essence, and soul. Your friend killed 8 of my subordinates, so she should pay a price. Ink Ghost sneered. His expression was extremely ferocious. He not only wanted Lu Zi to die, but he also wanted Qin Chuan to die as well. Now he couldn't care less about orders. He only wanted to kill to vent the hatred in his heart. Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qin Chuan suddenly turned his head and looked at Ink Ghost. He wanted to kill Ink Ghost. As long as Ink Ghost died, he believed that the ghostly shadow would also die. Seeing Qin Chuan rushing towards him, Ink Ghost sneered. He disdained Qin Chuan's reckless behavior. Although Qin Chuan had killed many of his subordinates, he didn't rely on Qin Chuan's own strength. Instead, he relied on the dream created by Lu Zi. Now that he didn't have Lu Zi's help, he didn't think that Qin Chuan could pose any threat to him. But soon, Ink Ghost realized that he was wrong again. Heavenly Light. Qin Chuan didn't have time to fight with Ink Ghost. He used the first transformation of the Dragon Ball's 9 transformations, Heavenly Light. Then, a silvery white sword shadow crossed the sky and fell straight down. Heavenly Sword. After using Heavenly Light and Heavenly Sword in succession, Qin Chuan used his powerful mental power to form a long needle and stabbed at Ink Ghost. He must kill him in one hit. Facing Qin Chuan's continuous attacks, Ink Ghost's expression immediately became extremely shocked. He could resist the might of Heavenly Light, but it was difficult to resist the might of Heavenly Sword, not to mention the attack on the mental level. For a moment, he was exhausted from defending and couldn't find a chance to counterattack. And Qin Chuan had already made up his mind to not give Ink Ghost a chance to counterattack. Whoosh! Qin Chuan's figure flickered and cut through the sky. In an instant, he closed in on Ink Ghost. A ball of lightning flashed in his hand and pierced straight at Ink Ghost's head. Leifa Qianjun. Come! Qin Chuan's Leifa didn't hit Ink Ghost as he wished. Ink Ghost's body was wrapped in layers of shells that suddenly appeared like a round ball. Leifa bombarded it. Although he successfully repelled the round ball, he couldn't break it. Roar! The round ball that was repelled by Qin Chuan suddenly turned into a huge Ink Ghost beetle that was comparable to an aircraft carrier. This was Ink Ghost's original body and also his strongest form. You're very good. Ink Ghost's dozens of huge eyeballs stare at Qin Chuan, his eyes full of anger. He didn't expect that he would be forced to reveal his original body by Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan also didn't expect Ink Ghost to be so difficult to deal with. His continuous attacks didn't have any effect at all. On the other side, Lu Zi's situation was getting worse and worse. It looked like she couldn't hold on any longer. Roar! Finally, Lu Zi couldn't take it anymore and turned into her dragon form. She turned into a dark purple, illusory dragon. Her body that was hundreds of feet long meandered in the universe and roared continuously. Seeing this, Ink Ghost was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. What was he seeing? A real dragon. Argentin was stunned, Bela was stunned, and Knight Serenity was even more stunned. Knight Serenity had always known that Qin Chuan had the bloodline of a real dragon, but this was the first time she knew that Lu Zi also had the bloodline of a real dragon. A real dragon. It's a real dragon. Ink Ghost suddenly shouted. He turned his eyes to Qin Chuan and stared at Qin Chuan. He said in a low voice, "Are you Qin Chuan?" That Qin Chuan. Hearing Ink Ghost suddenly shout his name, Qin Chuan knew that his identity had been exposed. At this time, he couldn't care about anything else and directly took out the Flipping Sky Seal. Flipping Sky Seal. With Qin Chuan's low roar, the Flipping Sky Seal shone and turned into a huge bronze square seal the size of a planet. It smashed down on Ink Ghost's head. Immediately, Ink Ghost screamed. However, he didn't die. He was tenaciously fighting against the Flipping Sky Seal. At this time, Chuan's strength was almost depleted by the flipping sky seal. When he saw that Ink Ghost was still struggling, he gritted his teeth and took out the 10,000 Demon Seal. He activated the 10,000 Demon Seal with the bloodline of a real dragon. If one flipping sky seal wasn't enough, he would add another 10,000 Demon Seal. He didn't believe that he couldn't kill Ink Ghost with this. 10,000 Demon Seal. When Chuan roared again, the blood essence of 10,000 demons sealed in the 10,000 demons seal suddenly turned into the image of 10,000 demons. They made different hissing sounds and charged toward Ink Ghost. When the demon, who was struggling to resist the flipping sky seal, saw the 10,000 demons coming, he suddenly lost his mind and became confused. He couldn't resist the attack of the flipping sky seal and was severely suppressed by it. Under the attack of the 10,000 demons, he turned into a skeleton and died. With Ink Ghost's death, the ghost that was wreaking havoc in Lu Zi's body suddenly screamed and turned into ashes. Lu Zi had narrowly escaped death. Chapter 1182. Mo Gue died in a very aggrieved manner. This battle could be said to be the most aggrieved battle he had ever fought since he started cultivating. As soon as he appeared, he was forced into a deep sleep by Lu Zi's Meng Manji before he could even make a move. When he woke up, he discovered that all of his subordinates were dead. It wasn't easy for him to use the ghostly shadows to attack Lu Zi and regain some face. However, he didn't expect to infuriate Chuan. Not only was he attacked by the heavenly light and heavenly sword, but his spiritual world was also targeted by Chuan. If it wasn't for the shell protecting his body, Chuan's attack on Leifa would have made him suffer. When he revealed his true form and was about to unleash his invincible might, Lu Zi transformed into an illusory dragon and successfully attracted his attention. When he regained his senses, the cyclic sky seal had already descended. Before he could deal with the cyclic sky seal, the 10,000 demon seal had arrived. Wave after wave of attacks were relentless, not giving Mo Gue any chance to retaliate at all. If one were to calculate it carefully, the only time he had attacked LVZ with Phantom Shadow was when he had attacked her. After that, he had been beaten up passively. Even until his death, he did not have the chance to use his ultimate skill. For Chuan, this battle wasn't easy either. He didn't know how long Lu Zi could last under the attacks of the ghostly shadows. Therefore, he had to use almost all of his strength to end the battle quickly. Although he had reached the peak of the insightful Void Realm and was much stronger than when he used the Cyclic Sky Seal, the opponents he was facing now were many times stronger than before. This time, the Cyclic Sky Seal had almost drained all of his strength. Similarly, the Cyclic Sky Seal had almost drained all of his bloodline power. This caused Chuan's condition to plummet to an unprecedented low. It would be difficult for him to recover in a short period of time. However, Chuan was very happy. This was because they had killed Zerg's fleet, 8 mid-stage body integration stage overlords, and 1 late-stage body integration stage overlord. Even if Zerg was powerful, he would still be heartbroken by such a loss. Chuan, are you okay? Lu Zi, who had already transformed into her human form, came to Chuan's side and supported the pale-faced Chuan. Looking at Chuan's exhausted appearance, she felt very guilty. If she hadn't been careless and fallen for Ink Ghost's trick, Chuan wouldn't have become like this. After returning to the spaceship, Chuan immediately took a small recovery pill and a bottle of Sky Goat's milk to quickly recover his physical injuries and spiritual power. During this recovery process, Chuan was very surprised to find that when his spiritual power was recovering, his physical strength and spiritual power were also recovering at the same time. They faintly felt like they were about to fuse. This feeling, are they about to fuse? Chuan was surprised, but more than that, he was happy. Once he took this step, it meant that he was not far away from the body integration stage. While Chuan was carefully comprehending the process of fusing his powers, Knight Serenity and the others, who had finished off the remaining Zerg, returned to the spaceship. They saw Qin Chuan, who was quietly recuperating, and also saw Lu Zi, who was sitting next to Qin Chuan. Their gazes were very subtle. True dragons, a race that only existed in legends. They had seen it with their own eyes. Facing everyone's gaze, Lu Zi felt something. She opened her eyes and looked at Caro, who had just been rescued, and asked, "What happened?" Faced with Lu Zi's question, Caro replied with a bitter face, "Not long after you left, the teleportation portal of Mount Great Moon was suddenly activated. A group of Zer people came. When Teacher Jessie and I heard the news and rushed over, they captured us without saying a word. We were powerless to resist. When they asked about you, Teacher Jessie and I chose to refuse to answer. However, they directly killed Teacher Jessie and obtained the answers they wanted by searching her soul. After that, they used my photon computer to contact Bela." Caro's answer was up to this point. Everyone understood what happened after that. Zerg had used some kind of method to lock onto their position and found their way here. Lu Zi was silent for a moment. Then, she asked, "Apart from these people who came today, who else is Zerg? There's also a one-legged guy, but he didn't come with us. Ink Ghost is a subordinate," Caro said to everyone. "I'm guessing that one-legged guy is at least at the peak of the combination stage." When everyone heard Caro's words, their expressions became a little ugly. Ink Ghost was already so difficult to deal with. If that one-legged guy came looking for them, they would probably be in great danger. Subconsciously, everyone looked at Qin Chuan, wanting to hear Qin Chuan's opinion. Qin Chuan needs time to recuperate. "Let's not disturb him for the time being," Lu Zi said to everyone. "We'll prepare to leave the Holy Cluster and return to the Celestial Cluster." Everyone nodded in agreement when they heard Lu Zi's words. In their current situation, if they encountered that one-legged guy, it was very likely that they would all be wiped out. It was better to leave the Holy Cluster as soon as possible. When everyone quieted down, they involuntarily looked at Qin Chuan and Lu Zi again. From the performance of the previous battle, whether it was Qin Chuan or Lu Zi, both had shocked them too much. In particular, the scene of Lu Zi transforming into a phantom dragon was something they would never forget. However, although everyone had a lot of questions in their hearts, they tactfully did not ask. Sometimes, too much curiosity was not a good thing. In the boundless universe, an insect ship was slowly moving forward. The one-legged figure sat in the command room, looking ahead indifferently. They're all dead. Not a single one survived. Even Ink Ghost is no exception. The one-legged man was surprised by the complete annihilation of the Vanguard team. Like Ink Ghost, he thought that this was a battle that they would definitely win. He did not expect such a huge reversal. How did a mid-stage unification stage and an early-stage unification stage do this? Even if the other three insightful emptiness stage cultivators have all advanced to the early-stage unification stage, they shouldn't have such powerful combat strength. Does this mean that there's someone behind them? The one-legged man thought a lot. He could not figure out, but it did not matter. When he saw those people with his own eyes, some questions would naturally be answered. No one can leave the Holy Cluster unscathed after killing my subordinates, no matter who you are or where you come from. Chapter 1183. 3 days passed in a row. Qin Chuan had been cultivating in silence. No one disturbed him, and no one would disturb him. During these 3 days, the spaceship advanced steadily. They even replenished their energy on a trading planet. During this process, they did not encounter any danger, which made everyone relax a little. At our current speed, it will take at least 20 days to reach the interstellar portal to leave the Holy Cluster. During these 20 days, anything can happen. We must be prepared. Qin Chuan was cultivating, so the responsibility of making decisions was transferred to Lu Zi. No one objected to this. We don't know how strong that one-legged Zerg is, but since he's Ink Ghost superior, he's definitely not weaker than Ink Ghost. I think he's at least at the pinnacle of the combination stage. We have no chance of winning against such an opponent. Lu Zi had a very clear understanding of everyone's strength. Argentine was at the mid-stage of the combination stage, and so was her actual combat strength. Knight Serenity was at the early stage of the combination stage, and her actual combat strength was equivalent to the mid-stage of the combination stage. Bela and Knight Serenity were in a similar situation. As for Lu Zi, she could feel that she had fused all her strength, but she was still a distance away from reaching the combination stage. Her actual combat strength was also equivalent to the mid-stage of the combination stage. In other words, Lu Zi's team, excluding Qin Xuan, had the combat strength of 4 mid-stage combination stage cultivators. Against an overlord who was suspected to be at the pinnacle of the combination stage, it was tantamount to a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Even if Qin Xuan recovered to his peak state, it would be difficult for them to deal with an overlord at the pinnacle of the combination stage. After all, Qin Xuan had already done his best to kill Ink Ghost. Even if he tried again, he would only be able to kill another opponent like Ink Ghost. It was basically impossible for him to kill an overlord at the pinnacle of the combination stage. Moreover, they couldn't expect Qin Xuan to risk his life every time they encountered a strong opponent. It's best if that one-legged Zerg doesn't come after us. If he does, Argentine, Bela, and I will stay here by time. Knight Serenity, you take Qin Xuan and leave. If you can't leave the holy cluster, find a remote place to hide. Grave expressions appeared on everyone's faces upon hearing Lu Zi's arrangements. Even if they did everything in their power, they might not be able to hold off a supreme being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage for very long. Even if Knight Serenity were to flee with Qin Xuan, they might not be able to get very far. To put it simply, this could be the last battle of one of them in their life. Lu Zi saw the grave expressions on everyone's faces. She smiled and said, "What I said just now is only the worst-case scenario. We haven't reached that point yet, so everyone can relax for the time being. Don't take it too seriously." Upon hearing Lu Zi's words, Knight Serenity said, "If such a thing really happens, I hope that you'll be the one to take Qin Xuan away, not me." Before Lu Zi could say anything, Knight Serenity continued, "I know that you chose to stay behind to stabilize the morale of the troops. However, you should know that we're not a bunch of loose sand. We all know you and Qin Xuan. We know that you're not the kind of people who would abandon your comrades. If you want to take revenge in the future, you and Qin Xuan will only have hope if you're alive." "That's what I think too." Bela looked at Lu Zi. "You and Qin Xuan leave. We'll stay behind." Argentine pursed her lips. "I hope that you can help me take care of the Yin clan. That's my only wish." Upon hearing everyone's words, Lu Zi could not help but show a look of gratitude. Just as she was about to say something, Caro, who was piloting the spaceship, suddenly exclaimed, "There's an insectoid in front of us." Upon hearing Caro's words, everyone immediately stopped talking. They quickly walked to the command deck and looked at the screen. On the screen, a black insectoid with a somewhat exaggerated design was quietly parked in the air, blocking their path. Just by looking at this insectoid, everyone could already guess that the one-legged Zerg must be in this insectoid, and it was coming for them. "Stop moving forward." Lu Zi immediately ordered them to stop moving forward. At a time like this, they could not continue moving forward. Just as Lu Zi ordered them to stop moving forward, a one-legged figure slowly flew out of the insectoid. His gaze traversed thousands of miles and landed on the warship that Qin Xuan and the others were in. His expression was calm and indifferent. "Kacha! Kacha!" Suddenly, the spaceship that Qin Xuan and the others were in made a sound as if it could not bear the weight anymore. It was as if it was being crushed, squeezed, and was about to be crushed into a ball by a huge force. Upon realizing this, everyone's expression changed drastically. Without hesitation, they made the decision to leave the spaceship. Knight Serenity directly broke through the airspace above the command deck. Argentine pierced through the spaceship and grabbed Qin Xuan, who was cultivating in the training room. Everyone rushed out of the spaceship together. Almost at the same time that everyone left the spaceship suddenly exploded. Everyone looked back at the spaceship that had already exploded behind them with lingering fear. If they had been any slower, They might have been buried in the explosion. The force of the spaceship's explosion naturally could not cause any harm to them, but the key was the external force that caused the spaceship to explode. Separated by thousands of miles, they did not see the one-legged figure move at all. Then, their spaceship exploded. Things are getting a little troublesome. Without a spaceship, we can only fly. Lucy looked at the one-legged figure in the distance with a serious expression. Then, she looked at Qin, who was still immersed in his cultivation. She was slightly anxious. Even such a violent explosion from a spaceship did not wake Qin up. Obviously, Qin would not wake up in a short period of time. Lucy, let's follow your plan. Argentine handed Qin over to Lucy. If Qin had not saved her back then, perhaps she would have been corroded by the power of the void and become a void creature. Now, it was time for her to return this life to Qin. On the other side, Knight Serenity and Bela were also ready for battle. As for Caro, she would not be of any use if she stayed, so she would leave with Lu Zi and Qin. Everyone, take care. Lu Zi gritted her teeth. She knew that saying anything more would only be a waste of time. Therefore, she resolutely turned around and prepared to leave with Qin. Chapter 1184. Where do you think you're going? A low and hoarse voice sounded in everyone's ears. Immediately afterward, a translucent cube appeared around everyone and enveloped them. Seeing this scene, everyone's expressions became extremely ugly. Argentine tried to attack this translucent cube, but her attack was like raindrops falling on water. Other than setting off a ripple, it did not have any effect on the translucent cube. We're trapped. Argentine came to a conclusion that was not really a conclusion. It was a little difficult to break this translucent cube with their strength. Trapped. In other words, the worst-case scenario that everyone had previously prepared for was no longer the worst-case scenario. The current situation where no one could escape was the worst-case scenario. Puff! Knight Serenity opened his mouth and spat out a cloud of dragon breath, hoping to melt this translucent cube with dragon breath. Unfortunately, when the dragon breath touched this translucent cube, it melted in the blink of an eye as if it had encountered water. Don't make a meaningless struggle. One-Legged looked at everyone and said indifferently, I'll take you back and let the devil bug deal with you. Qin and the others had never heard of the name devil bug, but this did not prevent them from knowing that their current situation was very dangerous. However, they could also tell from One-Legged's words that they were temporarily safe. One-Legged raised his hand and waved gently. The translucent cube began to move toward the west, while One-Legged drove the insect ship behind. The scene looked extremely strange. What the hell is this? Is it the law of space? Bela frowned slightly as she looked at the translucent cube. She had never seen this method before. No one could answer Bela's question because no one knew what it was. In order not to anger One-Legged, they would not make a move unless they were absolutely sure or had no other choice. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We have to think of a way. Lucy frowned. If he brings us to Zerg's territory, we're really done for. While speaking, Lucy turned her head to look at Knight Serenity and asked, Did you feel anything special when you attacked with Dragon Breath just now? Knight Serenity shook his head and replied, The Dragon Breath was destroyed almost instantly. I didn't have time to feel anything at all. What about you? Knight Serenity looked at Argentine. Argentine had also attacked this translucent cube just now. Perhaps Argentine would feel something special. However, to everyone's disappointment, Argentine shook his head and said, Other than being sure that this is not something created by the law of space, I didn't gain anything. Although everyone had already expected such an outcome, they couldn't help but feel frustrated and despairing when faced with such a situation. They would rather fight One-Legged and be killed than be trapped in such a mysterious, translucent cube and be unable to do anything. No one liked this feeling of powerlessness. Maybe Qin will have a way. Bela looked at Qin, who was still immersed in cultivation, with a complicated expression. Our current situation is very bad. Why don't we wake him up? Everyone looked at Qin Chuan when they heard Bela's words. Although they knew very well that what Bela said might be their only way now, if they woke Qin Chuan up like this, no one knew if it would cause any harm to Qin Chuan. If it's not a last resort, I hope he can wake up on his own. Lucy shook her head and rejected Bela's suggestion. She knew Qin Chuan well. She knew that Qin Chuan couldn't be ignorant of the outside world. Since Qin Chuan hadn't woken up, it meant that Qin Chuan was now at a very critical stage. It was best not to disturb him. Lucy was right. Qin Chuan was now at a very critical stage. He was trying to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space with his body. Once he succeeded, he would advance to the form synthesis stage. If he was forcibly woken up at this time, all his efforts would be in vain. It's too difficult. Qin Chuan was very vexed right now. He had already fused his spiritual power, mental power, physical power, and other powers together and turned them into a brand new type of power, pure power. If he wanted to, he could go through the tribulation and become a weakest body integration stage, Overlord. However, Qin Chuan's goal was obviously not to become the weakest Overlord in the form synthesis stage. Therefore, he was trying to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space. If he wanted to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space, it might be a very easy task. However, if he wanted to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space at the same time, the difficulty would increase by dozens of times. At this time, Qin Chuan was very clear that everyone was facing a great crisis. They needed him to come out and solve this crisis. However, if he couldn't advance to the form synthesis stage, he would also be helpless in the current predicament. If I still can't fuse the law of space at the last moment, I can only temporarily put down the law of space and fuse the law of lightning. Qin Chuan had to prepare for the worst. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, the runic sword in his mind was absorbing and refining the runic stone obtained from Iacos. It had reached the final stage. As long as it absorbed the power of the runic stone, the damage of the runic sword would be healed to 60%. Once it succeeded, the power of the runic sword would no longer be reduced. The runic sword would activate the ability to self-repair and recover. It would go from a one-time deal to a sustainable development. Buzz! When the last bit of power of the runic stone was absorbed by the runic sword suddenly shone brightly. The wounds on the sword were healed little by little and disappeared. After a while, the runic sword returned to its original appearance, which was full of an ancient charm. At this moment, the void lotus on Qin Chuan's chest seemed to have sensed the existence of the runic sword and suddenly began to struggle violently. It actually faintly showed signs of breaking through the seal of the nirvana true flame. Sensing the strange movements of the void lotus, Qin Chuan was greatly alarmed. Originally, he was overjoyed that the runic swords had recovered most of their strength, but now they were instantly washed away. If the void lotus were to break through the seal of the nirvana flames, then it was extremely likely that he would be corroded by the power of the void. I don't care. Qin Chuan gritted his teeth and decided to temporarily give up on fusing the law of space and fuse the law of lightning to advance to the form synthesis stage. Just as Qin Chuan was about to do so, the nirvana true fire suddenly collapsed and the power of the void gushed out. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.